Prologue. Where should I start? I can guess that the catalyst for all this was clearly the event that happened yesterday. While I was wasting time at home, I received an email. Announcement. Space Survival Development Team is currently recruiting closed beta testers for the sequel. If you wish to participate, please click the Accept button below. Space Survival. It's a survival RPG game where you choose one of the various races existing in the vast space and you survive, explore, and evolve. What caught my attention here was the various races. Ever since I was young, I've been fond of aliens, monsters, and different species. Space Survival was a game that brought my fantasies to life. Sometimes I became a metallic gremlin, tearing apart human ships, and other times, I transformed into a mutant monster slaughtering enemies on the ground. At times, I even led a hive-minded organization to conquer planets. I've played as all sorts of space creatures that could come out of nightmares, but there was one race that I enjoyed the most, the unidentified aggressive space morph, or ASM for short. I combined the A from aggressive with morph and called them amorphs. Amorphs were space monsters inspired by creatures from the classic film The Thing, capable of acquiring genetic information from their victims to enhance themselves. They had no limits to how strong they could become, which might make them seem like overpowered beings at first glance. However, due to their incredibly challenging survival difficulty and the inherent risks of their race, they had a notorious reputation. In essence, they got stronger over time, but they were extremely weak in the beginning, making it nearly impossible to accomplish anything. Survival games are all about accumulating resources and skills over time, but Amorphs had a mechanism that went against this flow. Dying repeatedly in the early stages reduced the opportunity to get stronger, and if you couldn't get stronger, you'd keep dying in a vicious cycle. Nevertheless, one could argue that you could overcome this through effort and skill. But Amorphs had a fatal flaw that made it difficult: they couldn't communicate or cooperate with other races. According to the game's lore, Amorphs viewed other races as living prey or genetic material to be collected. The game developers actually implemented this in the game. It goes without saying that not being able to communicate or play cooperatively in a multiplayer game with tons of players is a huge risk. In the beginning, Amorphs are weak, and they can't cooperate with other players either. These two drawbacks combine to make Amorphs the worst of the non-mainstream races in space survival. To the extent that a rumor circulated in the community suggesting that the SM at the end of ASM stood for sadist, referring to the game developers, and masochist, referring to the players, it could even be considered an accepted fact. So, why did such a trash race become my favorite? The reason is simple. It's because they were a race that could evolve and grow stronger freely based on choice and will. Well, besides that, I also have a liking for aliens. Just as they say, those who enjoy it the most tend to excel at it, and I was one of the hardcore players who achieved the most challenging achievement in the game, Galactic Conqueror as an Amorph. In the community, they even called me the Honorable Amorph, the Xeno Lover, or the Morph Enthusiast. But, of course, there's no eternal king. I totally forgot that people have to go to school these days. And that's for 2 years in a row. Since I never left the house and just played the game, the outcome was only natural. I had to graduate, so I temporarily left the game to focus on my studies. Because of that, I didn't even know that a sequel was in development. Anyway, Space Survival is my most beloved game. What gamer wouldn't be excited about the sequel to a game that's practically a life pick? Naturally, I clicked accept. The result is this, huh? I raised my second right leg to scratch my forehead, covered with a shell. As I scratched, my back started itching again, so this time, I decided to use my fourth left leg. As I scratched my back, a translucent scale came off the tip of my toenail. If someone were to ask how a human could have 4 pairs of legs, I could respond like this: because I'm not a human. I sighed as I looked at my first front leg in my hand, and in response, the sensory aid device hanging from my chin wiggled, as if in harmony with my sigh. The shape of my hands was far from that of a human or a mammal. My long, slender limbs were divided into 3 segments reminiscent of the legs of a spider or an arthropod. At the tips of my legs, 2 claws served as fingers, looking quite cute. I hoped these weren't my hands, but the claws seemed to move in response to my will, as if urging me not to ignore them. Shifting my gaze along my legs, my body had a sleek, elongated form like that of a snake or a lizard. My back and belly were covered in a tough shell, which gave them a hard, unyielding feel. In contrast, my sides were made up of soft flesh, unlike the rigid carapace. I had 3 pairs of legs, similar in shape to my front limbs, sprouting from my sides. Finally, at the rear, a thick, flexible tail extended. At the tip of the tail was a sharp stinger, my only weapon. I knew the identity of this small and bizarre creature. The favorite race in space survival, the amorph. Beings with boundless potential who made me the ruler of the galaxy. As a hatchling. Race, unidentified aggressive space morph. Status, hatchling. Objective, survive. Special trait, super sense. In the vast expanse of space, in a universe where all sorts of monsters and transcendent beings were at play, I had possessed the weakest creature of all. Chapter 1. I guess it won't help to think about it. I decided to stop feeling discouraged at this point. It's not because I'm more optimistic than others that I take things lightly. Amorph is a combat species with strong vitality, but not during hatchling times. All I have are possibilities and potential. Right now, I'm just a fragile being that will die if I don't eat something within an hour. So I need to move diligently before my remaining energy runs out. Where I am now is inside a massive metal structure. I'm well aware that it's a spaceship made of alloy, swimming in the sea called space. Looks like something out of Megacorp or Star Union. Either way, they are not friendly forces to me. Looking around, I saw a stack of containers about 3 times the height of a person. Plastic boxes were visible between the stacked containers. As my chin-mounted auxiliary apparatus twitched, various pieces of information were implanted in my mind. A fascinating sensation. Experiencing the super sense that used to be implemented in the form of a mini-map in the game was completely different when felt directly through my body. Smells were heard like sounds, and sounds were seen, mixing the senses together to convey information. It was a sense that allowed me to perceive everything within its range simultaneously. At the tips of my claws, I could feel the vibrations generated by the fusion engine. The faint smells of various elements like oxygen, carbon, and more mixed in the air stimulated my auxiliary apparatus at its tip. The auxiliary apparatus extracted the fact that there was something edible among the various smells and transmitted it to my brain. My top priority now was nutrition. The fact that food was not far away was reassuring. My 3 pairs of legs moved towards the prey as they stepped on the cold metal plates. Each time my claws touched the grating-style floor, it made a squeaky sound. I passed through the forest of containers and reached the plastic boxes. Using my claws, I climbed up on top of one. Upon reaching the top, I noticed that the box had a lock that required a password to open. It's a password. Let's see. I leaned close to the number plate, and as my auxiliary apparatus twitched, fingerprints on the surface flowed into my mind. 1234, really? Even in the space age, the security level was this low. I pressed the button firmly with my front legs. A sound from inside the box indicated that the lock had been released. When I opened the lid, there were vacuum-sealed calorie bars stacked inside. I pulled out one from the top. With a simple tear using my claws, I took a bite. The texture was like chewing on a rubber eraser, but the game's tooltip had mentioned that it was designed exclusively for nutrition, and it seemed to be true. Well, at least I succeeded in replenishing my nutrition. It didn't taste good, but the high-calorie content made me feel energetic all the way to the tip of my tail. As I was about to take another bite, something caught my senses. My tail moved like an arrow and quickly pierced through the unknown object. A cockroach. The sharp fangs were lodged in the cockroach. It struggled to escape but eventually fell limp. I devoured the cockroach as if possessed. Its exoskeleton broke as it was crushed between my teeth, and its juices sprayed. It was a juicy creature, seemingly well fed and grown. After I finished eating it, a different message appeared in the text box from before. Predation effect activated. Successfully obtained wings genetic essence from cockroach. Extracted the wings from the biological characteristics of cockroach. Do you want to apply the wings? Oh. Getting a genetic essence this quickly is quite lucky. Genetic essences can be considered the alpha and omega of amorph operations, as it's a crucial element. The more genetic essences you acquire, the stronger you can evolve as a creature. Wings. In a game set in space, wings themselves are unlikely to have any special significance. But this is not a game, it's reality. Considering that I'm a gliding caterpillar, this trait is closer to being useful rather than bad. It allows me to establish dominance when hunting and provides an advantage in escaping. Accept. Trait application in progress. It felt like something was squirming on my back, and wings with the smooth and elastic texture characteristic of kite and grew. Application of wings trait complete. Good. I decided to test my wings. How should I move them? Unlike legs, wings are not a familiar part of the human body. Still, since they grew on my back, I tried exerting force around the dorsal area, feeling as if I was moving the area around the pectoral muscles. It was the right approach as the wings flapped slowly. Energy consumption is more severe than I thought. After trying a few times, I quickly understood. Flight consumes a considerable amount of energy. I stopped moving my wings and cracked open the calorie bar. To fully utilize the wings, I need something more. Having acquired wings was a welcome development, but there were other crucial abilities I needed to obtain from the cockroach. These abilities were essential for smooth and comfortable survival. First goal is set. I thought as I chewed on the calorie bar. I needed to become a cockroach killer. In my younger days, I read a story like this. A man named Jonah tried to escape God's command and was swallowed by a whale in the sea. If he were an ordinary person, he would have died, but Jonah, being under God's protection, did not die. He stayed inside the whale's belly for 3 days and then escaped. After that, Jonah faithfully followed God's words. The reason I brought up this old story out of the blue is that my situation is somewhat similar to Jonah inside the whale's belly. I'm also wandering inside the belly of a steel whale, floating in zero gravity, searching for cockroaches. Stuck to the wall, I waited, and a cockroach passed beneath me. My tail became a fishing hook, and I caught it. Gently but forcefully, my tail rose like a fisherman pulling up a net. The cockroach, hanging at the end, sensed its fate and struggled to escape in any way it could. It doesn't work like that. Sharp fangs pierced the cockroach's head. My small but sharp teeth moved continuously to prepare the tough outer shell and thick flesh for digestion. Only after the remains of the cockroach were reduced to a state resembling juice in a blender could they pass through the throat. In terms of nutrition, the calorie bar was overwhelmingly superior, but in terms of taste, the cockroach was much better. Thanks to it, I could do things I couldn't even imagine in my human days. It's funny to say this, but it tastes like silkworm pupa. Literally, it tastes like a soju snack. This makes it the 20th. Still no results, I guess. Just like my habit from my human days, I clenched my teeth with my front legs and summoned the text box. The text box appeared in front of my head at my will. Race, unidentified aggressive space morph. Status, hatchling. Objective, survive. Special trait, super sense, wings, chitinous exoskeleton. Getting my first set of wings seemed like a beginner's luck. Since then, I had devoured 19 more cockroaches, but I had obtained only 1 genetic essence. The chitinous exoskeleton isn't bad, but the chitinous exoskeleton was a powerful trait that greatly increased defense as you grew. It became more useful in the later stages, but it was unnecessary in my current situation. Increasing defense slightly in my near-zero defense hatchling state wouldn't make much difference. Other abilities were more critical. I really need to secure the robust vitality trait. Robust vitality was a common trait found in most insectoid or plant-based creatures. Of course, its effects were quite simple. It reduces energy consumption to delay aging. In a game where there was no concept of lifespan, it was a trait that concept-focused players or those who wanted to extend their gameplay focused on. However, in the situation where the game had become reality, its significance was entirely different. With robust vitality, there's less need to fuss over food. I couldn't survive in this cargo hold indefinitely. Vibrations from beyond the walls and faint footsteps echoing were reminders that time was running out. The ship's owner, humanity, was my enemy. Even without considering the background story of the game, it was hard to believe they would take kindly to me. They'll try to find me once they realize that the cargo is dwindling. And then, death or experimentation. To avoid a bleak future, I had to meet the conditions for evolution as quickly as possible, surpassing the hatchling stage. To do that, I needed to expand my activity range beyond this cargo hold. That was a lot of rambling. In short, I have to catch cockroaches diligently if I want to survive. Let's change locations. Cockroaches were sensitive and intelligent insects, so they never ventured into areas where their comrades had died. They knew that danger lurked in places where their fellow cockroaches had met their end. At first, I didn't know this fact and wasted 30 minutes sitting in the same spot, accomplishing nothing. Let's go. I bent my 8 legs to the wall, then suddenly exerted all my strength, propelling myself upwards. My body rebounded elastically and soared into the air. While floating in mid-air, my wings spread wide from my back. In human terms, it was like the muscles around the dorsal area, equivalent to the latissimus dorsi muscles, were tightly engaged with power. PR/N, the latissimus dorsi muscle is a broad, flat muscle that occupies the majority of the lower posterior thorax. As I began to flutter, my body, which had been falling, slowly rose into the air. A creature resembling a desert spider, fluttering its wings as it flew. If someone with a weak heart saw this, they might faint. Even while flying, my visual and auxiliary apparatus never stopped searching for cockroaches. At this point, I'm truly an honorable amorph. Lost in frivolous thoughts, I suddenly detected 2 cockroaches. There was one on the wall, and another was diligently crawling on top of a plastic box. I decided to catch the one closer to me, the one on the wall. I adjusted the angle of my wings, and my body turned in the direction of the cockroach. The cockroach seemed to be lost in thought or distracted, completely unaware of my approach. I grabbed it with my front legs, like an eagle snatching a fish. Before the little one could escape between my claws, I swiftly grabbed it and popped it into my mouth. Its seemingly pristine exoskeleton shattered, and juices along with bits of innards spewed out from its side. With one more left, I held it in my mouth, eyeing the next target. Oh no! The one near the floor noticed me. It scurried down beneath a box. With its small body and its legs pointed towards the floor gap, once it slipped through the crevice in the alloy sheet, my hunt would be over. I can't let it escape. I pushed the wall with my 4 pairs of legs to secure thrust and shot towards it like an arrow. The creature was already probing the crevice with its antennae and head. As soon as its lower half was visible, I landed like a missile, smashing into the unforgiving iron that offered no semblance of softness. Pain surged through my entire body due to the impact, but my focus was on the creature's rear end. My tail shot out like a mantis hunting its prey. It sliced through the air, and the tip, equipped with a sharp stinger, entered the hole in the metal sheet. The creature, which had just breathed a sigh of relief, panicked. Its brain, which had considered an immediate escape, was now split in 2 by the sharp sting. Phew! By a hair's breadth, I succeeded in hunting them both. My tail returned triumphantly to its place, bearing the proud spoils of victory. After finishing processing the carcass I had in my mouth, I started eating the creature attached to my tail. Just as I was about to finish devouring it, the long-awaited message appeared. Predation effect activated. Successfully obtained robust vitality genetic essence from cockroach. Extracted the robust vitality from the biological characteristics of cockroach. Do you want to apply the robust vitality? Of course, except a qualitatively different vitality coursed through my entire body. Muscles had thickened around the once long and slender legs, and the sheen on the chitinous exoskeleton covering my back and belly had improved. Now, it begins. In comparison to my body, it was an incredibly vast and expansive cargo hold within the ship. The time had come for me to break free from the world where I first set foot. Chapter 2. Where should I go next? In fact, I've already decided where to go. Let's go to the cooling room. Next to the reactor. Even in the space age, the way humans handle heat hasn't changed much from before. Next to the ship's heart, the nuclear fusion engine, there was a cooling room responsible for temperature control. The cooling room is an important facility, so not many people visit it. Despite being under strict security as a highly critical facility, the flip side is that there are fewer visitors. It's like they say, where it's darkest under the lamp. As long as I don't physically interfere with the cooling room, the area around it is a good place to grow while avoiding the gaze of the surveillance. Another advantage is that the cooling room is right next to the reactor. If, for some reason, I'm exposed to people, the cooling room is an easy place to use as a last line of defense. If things go south, I can always destroy the reactor and the cooling room and make my escape. If there's a problem with the cooling room, it means there's also a problem with the reactor, and a ship with a malfunctioning heart has no choice but to stop operating. Once the ship stops operating, all the life support systems that maintain the ship's environment will also cease to function. Initially, they might try to recover the ship, such as by running the auxiliary engines, but that won't last long either. Just as a creature with a damaged heart cannot escape death, the same goes for the ship. Unless there's a nearby planet to crash land on, the people on board the ship have only one fate: to kill and be killed in the dwindling oxygen. Of course, if the ship were to stop, I would have nowhere to go, so I should leave attacking the reactor as a last resort. Well then, shall we go? Before departing, I ate 2 more calorie bars. With my belly filled, I jumped up to the ceiling. Tiny suckers between my claws firmly anchored my body to the ceiling, allowing me to move easily even while hanging upside down. The reason insects can move along walls is thanks to structures called pulvili. These structures secrete a highly adhesive substance that helps them easily traverse smooth walls. Thanks to the substance secreted from between my claws, I could move just as smoothly while hanging from the ceiling. While walking upside down on the ceiling, I noticed an entrance leading to an air duct. Its external appearance resembled an enlarged window-type ventilation fan with iron bars screwed on the outside. On the inside, a giant blade rotated incessantly, emitting a fierce sound as it carried out its work. Breaking through the bars is still impossible. It would be nice to break everything impressively and enter, but it was impossible in my current hatchling state. Even if I tried to strike the bars with my claws, there was doubt as to whether I could damage the tough alloy material. And even if I did manage to damage it, it would be a problem. If there were any additional security measures, the AI overseeing the ship would immediately report any newly occurring errors to humans. In that case, my future would be nothing but tracking and death. In this case, I'll have to rely on my intellectual abilities. I raised my claws and turned the screws that secured the bars. If the ship's humans had paid more attention to security, they might have welded this place shut. Fortunately, they were a tribe that likes to use 1234 as their cargo password. The first barrier that blocked the air duct was easily disabled by my claws. The next obstacle was the blade of the ventilation fan on the inside. This is the critical moment. I had two ways to pass through here. One was to time it and avoid the blade while entering, and the other was to bring something and damage the ventilation fan blade. It goes without saying, but the latter method was impossible. Even if I threw an object at the thin fan blade, it was doubtful whether it would be enough to break it. Moreover, even if I succeeded in breaking it, there would be a problem. If there were any issues with the ventilation fan, the super AI controlling the ship would definitely not overlook it. The AI would immediately report any newly occurring errors to humans. In that case, my remaining future would be nothing but tracking and death. I have to go through here. From now on, it was time to rely on amorph's abilities. I just stood there, waiting, as I couldn't risk entering and having the blade tear me to pieces. While waiting, the auxiliary system began to collect various pieces of information, such as the flow of air, the flow of energy generated at the junction of the blades, and more. It wasn't just the auxiliary system working diligently. A highly developed sense of vision focused on the precise movements of the rotating blades to find weaknesses in the intricate machinery. How much time had passed? The auxiliary system detected traces of iron oxide mixed in the air and fine metal particles carried by the wind. Additionally, it discovered that the junction of the rotating blades slowed down briefly at certain points due to wear and tear. My brain, after reviewing all the information from my eyes and the auxiliary system, was saying, "Jump in right now. It's now or never." I trusted my heightened senses and leapt into the ventilation duct. The merciless machine god struck me with its air pressure as the blade sliced through the air. If I were still human, I might have shouted with joy, but my oral structure was not suited for laughter. All I could produce was a dry, hissing sound. After briefly savoring the moment of survival, I continued my journey. The ventilation duct had a complex, maze-like structure, but it posed no obstacle before my heightened senses. Normally, the ship's interior, which was like blood vessels, would have been quiet, but today it was even noisier due to the presence of an unfamiliar visitor. The sounds of the wind passing through the various ventilation fans scattered throughout, combined with the noise of my claws colliding with the metal plates. There are spiders here. The spiders and beetles I encountered on my way turned out to be good snacks during the journey. Both the beetles and the spiders, like me, had been living well, thanks to the abundance of food and energy sources on the spaceship. This ensured that I didn't have to worry about hunger or energy shortages on my way. Chewing on the spider's legs as I walked, I sensed the residual heat remaining in the duct diminish faintly. It was evidence that I was getting closer to the cooling room. I wanted to hurry, but the auxiliary system applied the brakes ahead. There was something important ahead, and it needed confirmation. I still couldn't see it, but I detected wavelengths of light not far away. After walking tirelessly for about 10 minutes on my 4 pairs of legs, I reached a section of the duct with an iron grating on the floor. I stood on the grating, looking down. People in white coats were seen moving between large test tubes and incubators. A laboratory. Wasn't this supposed to be a regular spaceship? I had assumed it was a supply or cargo ship because of the amount of food and weapons in the cargo hold, but now, it turned out to be a laboratory. If this ship was indeed a research vessel, it wouldn't be a bad condition for me. Hey, how are the results for experiment subject 026? It's another failure. TSK, the research officer is going to lose it again. She's an Earthling, after all. The captain can't help but spoil her. Sigh, let's call it a day. After confirming that the two men left the laboratory, I unscrewed the grating and descended below. They look like megacorp types. Megacorp was a human faction that had thrived around the solar system, a race loosely inspired by Earthlings. According to the lore, they were governed by massive corporations instead of governments, and most of their members were extreme materialists. While most human factions in the space survival game tended to be neutral, Megacorp leaned more towards a villainous alignment, perhaps due to their lore. There's no place other than Megacorp where they'd modify healthy individuals into slaves. Megacorp captured and modified people who were either poor or members of other alien races through a process known as employment. It was one of the unique racial traits of Megacorp, and in the game, players often found themselves actively using it because of the significant advantages it offered. In the game, of course. In real life, why would anyone do such a thing? The air in the laboratory was thick with the scent of blood. What should I do? The auxiliary system had provided me with the location of the refrigerator where the genetic samples were stored, but I couldn't make a hasty decision. When I eat is the crucial factor. For Amorph, collecting genetic essence wasn't just about gathering genetic samples, it was about when to consume them. To move beyond the hatchling stage, there was one essential condition: consuming a living sentient being. In other words, to evolve from a hatchling, one had to kill a person. Killing a person. In the game, killing people was no problem, but could it be done in reality? Even if you thought you could easily do it now, when faced with it in reality, hesitation could be the end. My body was in such a fragile state that it had to be done with a single blow. I should also refrain from causing a commotion here until I'm prepared. As much as I desired the genetic sample, eating and clearing it here would leave me unable to evade pursuit. Conquering the laboratory would only happen after I had killed and consumed a person. Let's see what's here today. My path would greatly change depending on the purpose of this research ship. If it specialized in terrestrial combat mutant soldiers or studied Hulk mutants, I could secure a robust body and combat abilities. On the other hand, if it was a place experimenting with space elves or cultists' psychic abilities, I might gain powerful psychic powers. Personally, I'd prefer the cultists, but it might be unrealistic to get psychic powers from the beginning. I began using all my sensory organs to examine what was in the laboratory. Unlike the dark and dingy cargo hold, the laboratory was surrounded by clean white walls. It looked remarkably good on the surface, but paradoxically, it was filled with death and suffering behind the bright facade. In the test tubes, living human brains and forcibly brought biological specimens were submerged in chemical solutions. AI in the incubators checked the status of embryos while sending electronic signals. Various pieces of information poured into my head, such as the smell of chemical compounds, busy electromagnetic waves in the air, the scent of blood and decaying skin tissue, and pheromones unconsciously emitted by organisms in pain. Amidst the flood of information from the auxiliary system, I caught one unusual piece of information. Help! Someone's asking for help? Using special wavelengths that humans couldn't perceive, some life form was requesting assistance from me. Intrigued, I followed the wavelengths, which led me to a test chamber labeled 026. Inside the chamber floated a pink, bubble-like organism. A bubble amoeba? Bubble amoebas were non-player creatures that inhabited aquatic planets. They usually floated in water like droplets but would engulf and digest their prey in an instant when it came close. Unless they were exceptionally large, they posed no significant threat to players, and they were harmless and cute-looking. Many players seeking solace in the harsh space survival world often favored them. I had never expected them to possess intelligence. However, this one had approached me and sent another wave. Pain. Help. While an exact translation was impossible, thanks to Amorph's unique senses, I could roughly grasp the meaning. This creature was in pain for some reason and was asking for my help. What should I do? I could consider eating it, but based on my memory, the bubble amoeba had the most useless trait for Amorph. Its trait was called oxygen storage, allowing it to provide a certain amount of oxygen in oxygen-deprived environments. While this might have been useful for other races, Amorph could survive for extended periods without oxygen, so this trait was entirely unnecessary. Eating is out of the question. But I want to help, and I don't know how. I focused my senses on the test chamber, searching for clues. I detected the flow of the mixture circulating within the thick hose connected at the bottom, the movements of measuring instruments inside the machine checking the liquid state, and a faint flow of electricity above the liquid surface. Electricity. Come to think of it, the little guy had a small sensor attached to its body. Connected by a wire, the sensor periodically sent electricity through its body. Understanding what the creature was requesting, I climbed up to the terminal next to the test chamber. On the terminal screen, there were periodic appearances of the creature's biorhythm graph and the experiment results of the AI. Was this what those two researchers were talking about earlier? Seems like they muttered about a failure and left without turning off the machine. I pressed the terminal button to stop the experiment. The faint electrical signals from the sensor were cut off, and the creature regained its vitality. It blinked its pink bubble-like body as if expressing gratitude. Thanks. It's okay. I didn't consider it a favor. If the creature had been necessary to me, I would have used it as a source for absorbing essence without hesitation. I just indulged in a whim momentarily, judging it as a harmless and incompetent creature. Survive on your own. In Megacorp's lab, there was no avoiding destruction. Nevertheless, I hoped to spend what remained of my life as comfortably as possible and left the laboratory. After about 30 minutes of walking through the corridor, the temperature suddenly dropped. Water droplets clung to the walls, and a thin frost covered the corridor floor. I had finally reached the cooling chamber. All right. Let's make a nest now. I gathered water droplets stuck to the walls and swallowed them in one go. Then, I held water in my mouth for a while, as if gargling, and spat it out again. It was no longer pure water. The water that entered my body had transformed into a substance with a peculiar composition harmful to creatures other than amorph. This filthy mucus, resembling gum chewed and spit out, had the effect of extending the lifespan of nearby amorph, enhancing the effects of their heightened senses. Once the coating of the corridor above the cooling chamber was complete, I settled down here. I stretched my body in the center of this sticky, toxic, and contaminated space. I felt cozy, like I was inside my mother's womb, and closed my eyes. I can feel it. The ship feels like a part of me. What's the most important thing to win in a war? It's information. The humans of Megacorp and me, amorph. They didn't know me, but I knew them. I knew where they were, what they were doing, where they were going, who they were talking to, and every piece of information flowed to me through the liquid that coated the corridor. They wouldn't know the war had already begun, and they were already in the midst of losing. In the darkness of the nest, I smiled silently. Chapter 3. 4 days after becoming an amorph, there had been significant changes. Firstly, my nest was complete. The once sterile corridors had blossomed with unholy vitality. The mucus I had expelled had solidified, some of it forming spores. From the holes in these spores, mucus periodically flowed, slowly expanding the nest. Now I can monitor the entire ship. I received real-time updates from the 200-meter elliptical research vessel. I couldn't monitor creatures as small as insects, but for humans, I could sense most of their activities. And secondly, as I moved back and forth between the cargo hold and the nest, I succeeded in acquiring a new ability by consuming roaches and spiders. Race: unidentified aggressive space morph. Status: hatchling. Objective: survive. Special traits: super sense, wings, chitinous exoskeleton, robust vitality, paralyzing stinger. The paralyzing stinger was a new ability I gained from the spiders. Although it became less useful later on in the game as we encountered creatures made of energy or metallic entities, it was quite effective in the early stages. It's a perfect ability for me, who needs to hunt the strong with a weak body. I concentrated my consciousness on my tail, and a drop of yellow liquid fell from its end. With this, I could easily subdue a single adult human. It only lasted for about 5 minutes, but that was enough time to kill someone without any trouble. I expressed my gratitude to the spider, not only for providing me with sustenance but also for this valuable gift. Then, I contemplated my next steps. Most of the ship's crew currently on board consisted of 222 people. Among them, 96 were soldiers and officers responsible for ship defense, while 21 were high-ranking personnel in the command section. The rest were civilians, including researchers, technicians, and cooks. The problem is, who to target? I pondered. Initially, I considered targeting the captain to disrupt the chain of command. However, upon further consideration, that didn't seem like a great idea. There were officers who could step in for the captain, making it challenging to inflict significant damage. The most important person who's irreplaceable on this ship. There were only 2 individuals who met both criteria: the chief medical officer and the chief research officer. Of these, I prioritized the chief research officer. The reason was simple. She's crucial to my survival. After observing the lab for several days, I came to a conclusion. The chief research officer's name was Karaji Eugen. When I killed someone earlier, she was the only person who could create a tracking device immediately. 2 days ago, one of the subjects escaped, but she managed to create a tracking device within 2 hours, successfully capturing the escapee. That creature almost got me because of her. If it had used the ventilation shafts, I would have been in danger. But thanks to its fleeing elsewhere, I could overcome the crisis safely. Since the incident with the escaped subject, Karaji Eugen has moved up in my list of potential threats. And she has an oddly good sense for a human, I noted. Once, she nearly caught me by staring at the ventilation shaft I was in. Afterward, I had to relocate frequently whenever she appeared to sense my presence. I wonder if she has psychic powers. Psychic powers. A concept similar to commonly known telekinesis, telepathy, mind control, and other psychic abilities. Having psychic powers allowed for an endless array of abilities, from simple telekinesis that could move objects without touching them to performing feats like distorting light to render the ship invisible, akin to magic. Even during the game, psychic powers were a game changer. When aiming to obtain psychic powers, cults were often targeted. Cult species possessed psychic powers as an innate genetic trait, making it easier to target their genetic essence. Occasionally, rare individuals among humans also exhibited latent psychic power potential. Whether Karaji Eugen fell into this rare category was uncertain, but from the perspective of a hunter, clever and sensitive prey posed a significant challenge. Even if she doesn't know my true identity, she'll surely create some tracking device to chase me down, I speculated. If I'm going to use hit-and-run tactics, I need to avoid being tracked as much as possible. As an amorph evolved into a fluid state, I would become immensely more powerful than hatchlings. However, I couldn't engage the ship's soldiers in direct combat until I had secured enough genetic essence. Until then, guerrilla warfare would be the strategy. Therefore, Karaji Eugen needed to be eliminated, not only for my evolution but also to ensure my survival. Now, how should I hunt her down? Scratching my head with my front legs, I pondered. Given that she was a civilian and a female, it wouldn't be too difficult to kill her in a one-on-one situation. Except for one major obstacle. The bodyguards. Wherever she went, armed guards followed. Even when she slept in her bedroom at night, security personnel took shifts, constantly guarding her. She might be physically weak, but the presence of many protectors around her posed a significant challenge in targeting Karaji Eugen. Merely thinking about it won't solve the problem, I realized. It seemed I would have to keep monitoring her and seize any opportunities that arose. As I continued to watch for openings, hunger gnawed at me. Leaving the comfortable nest behind, I made my way to the mundane cargo hold. I checked the corridor ventilation grill for any signs of people before opening the wire mesh and hopping down. Landing silently on the floor, I climbed up to the terminal next to the door. I can't keep avoiding the ventilation shaft forever. I'm not a cat, and I don't have 9 lives. Risking my life every time I needed to eat wasn't a sustainable strategy. Unlike other key facilities, the cargo hold had no security system for monitoring visitors. Using my enhanced senses from the nest, I confirmed that, aside from the designated personnel, there were no other individuals entering the cargo hold. The designated personnel only visited for routine inspections once a day, so as long as I avoided that time, I could enter and exit without being detected. Open. As I entered the numbers into the terminal, a sturdy metal door hissed and swung open, revealing a dimly lit cargo hold. I headed straight for the familiar plastic containers. The sudden intrusion of a predator stirred the residents of the cargo hold. The scent of corrosion, the pheromones released by the approaching threat, and the sound of tiny insects skittering on the alloy floor to warn of the predator's presence all mixed together. Enjoying stimuli from the hidden world that only I could sense, I climbed onto the boxes. Just as I usually did, I retrieved 2 calorie bars from the box. I consumed one on the spot, tearing open the wrapper of the other with my front legs and holding it in readiness. Shall we go? I stored the remaining wrappers neatly in the box and left the cargo hold. Retracing my steps through the corridor, I headed back towards the laboratory. Upon reaching the laboratory, I went straight to experiment subject 26. The collapsed bubble amoeba greeted me with ripples when it saw me. Not only through greetings but also through its glowing body, it expressed happiness, which made me feel good as well. I brought food again today. Food, it replied. As it quivered and shone even brighter this time, I mentally chuckled and prepared to give it its meal. While monitoring Karaji Eugen for 2 days, I had learned one thing: an experiment was underway in the laboratory to awaken unknown traits latent in bubble amoebas. I didn't know what abilities this seemingly harmless mascot possessed, but the researcher seemed quite confident. During the game, there weren't any special abilities. Is this one different, or is it because the species has changed? For some reason, experiment subject 26 received special treatment, and I believed it was essential to establish a positive relationship with it. Not immediately, but perhaps it could prove helpful in the future when I conquered the ship. It's a bit of a hobby, I suppose. I went to the experiment chamber, where I opened the lid and revealed the container with a minimal amount of nutrients meant for basic sustenance. I carefully cut it into pieces since putting the entire thing in would undoubtedly clog the feeding system. The fragments passed through the hose connecting the two chambers and were delivered in front of the creature. The bubble amoeba enveloped the calorie bar pieces with its entire body, and once it seemed to have digested everything, I repeated the process. When the creature finished eating 1 calorie bar, it emitted a slow twinkle of light indicating it was full. I guess you like it. I never knew during the game why people searched for bubble amoebas, but now I felt like I understood. Seeing the creature emit light in rhythm with a certain pattern underwater, I couldn't help but find myself entranced. Ooh! At that moment, someone intruded within my range of perception. They were research personnel attempting to enter the laboratory. I quickly climbed into the ventilation duct to hide, and a short while later, they entered the laboratory. Chapter 4. Due to the wretched situation he found himself in, Wei, a Ganymede colony native, felt like he was on the brink of death. When he first joined the project, he couldn't have been happier upon learning that his superior was not just any earthling but a noble capital, essentially royalty within Megacorp's ruling class. If he could establish a connection with them, his dream of immigrating to Mars, something he had only fantasized about, could become a reality. With such anticipation, he boarded the ship, but Wei's dream was shattered sooner than he expected. That crazy woman again. She says today is a day off. Wei wiped away the beads of sweat dripping from his half-bald head and stole a glance at his young and capable superior standing beside him. Her name was Karaji Eugen, Wei's superior and a noble capital belonging to the Eugen family, one of the 5 noble houses that ruled Earth. Today, as it was a non-working day, she was dressed in casual attire, holding a cat in her arms. Damn it. Why the hell does a cat need a walk? Wei briefly cursed himself for thinking of going to the garden for some fresh air. Karaji brought up the question that he had heard hundreds of times before entering the lab. When will experiment 26 show results? If we don't achieve significant results that we can report to the company before we reach our destination, they might reconsider your employment over there. Ugh. Please, not that. As soon as the word employment came out of her mouth, cold sweat poured out of Wei's forehead like a waterfall. As a senior researcher at Megacorp, he knew all too well what employment meant. His gaze briefly shifted to the brain inside the test tube, almost as if his predecessor was beckoning him to join. Senior researcher, I mean, Mr. Wei. Yes, yes. Karaji, who had been giving him a cold look, suddenly changed her expression and began to comfort him with a gentle tone. I don't wish for such results either. I have expectations from senior researcher Wei as well. If we can extract that aptitude from experiment 26, a promotion to chief researcher is not out of the question. Really? Yes. At the very least, chief researcher, and if things go well, we might establish connections with Mars. They have a keen interest in this project, after all. Upon hearing her words, Wei's eyes lit up. He decided to tell her about a method he had only contemplated but never attempted. Well, there is one remaining method. What is it? I want to try administering Psinem. Psinem? Are you talking about the drug made by Star Union? Yes. Karaji Eugen stroked the cat's head silently. The cat purred in response to its owner's affectionate touch. Psinem has awakening effects. I know what it does. We used it to secure the project before. Psinem, it's a drug we haven't tried. Actually, there are a few other substances, but we've tried all the ones with similar ingredients. Psinem is the only one left. Kai's gaze shifted toward experiment 26. Her look wasn't as gentle as when she petted the cat. Observing the test subject, she resembled a machine sorting goods in a factory. Fine. Administer it right away. But if we don't neutralize it, it could be life-threatening. If we wait for that, we'll have to wait until tomorrow. We don't have much time left. The phrase "we don't have much time" wasn't exclusive to Wei. She, as the project leader, would also be responsible if the experiment failed. She belonged to a higher echelon than Wei. The impact of any blemish on her career would be significant. Moreover, she had never experienced failure in her entire life. The looming possibility of her first failure made her even more anxious. As you know, we should have had research results by now. Well, that's true, but normally, it's time to finalize the report. But we haven't elicited any meaningful response from the test subject yet. I believe you understand how serious this situation is. Wei couldn't refute her words because they were true. Alright, I'll administer it right away. Wei retrieved a purple test tube from the refrigerator. I'll start with 0.01 milligrams. As Wei connected the test tube to the terminal and operated the console, a small amount of the substance within the test tube was injected. The bubble amoeba remained unresponsive. There were no notable changes in the graph on the terminal screen. Wei wiped the sweat that flowed like raindrops and pressed the button on the terminal again. I'll administer 0.05 milligrams. This time, there was a response. The bubble amoeba convulsed in apparent agony. Wei couldn't hide his joy at the anticipated reaction. He watched the test subject with excitement. Karaji's face also showed a hint of interest as she observed the experiment. Next is 0.07 milligrams. Wait. Since there's a response, you can increase the dosage. Really? Administer all of it? Well, that's a bit. Just do it. When Wei hesitated, Karaji pushed him aside and pressed the administer button herself. The liquid from the test tube drained completely into the experiment tube. Eventually, the bubble amoeba's body expanded as if someone had blown air into it. Lights flashed madly from its body, and its skin couldn't withstand the expansion, tearing apart. It was clear to anyone that the bubble amoeba was enduring extreme pain, but among the people present, no one cared about that issue. Please. Just a little more. Wei clenched his fist tightly while watching the graph on the terminal screen skyrocket to the ceiling. About 5 minutes had passed. The graph took a sharp dive and crashed to the floor. Wei felt a sense of resemblance between the plummeting graph and his own future. Inside the test chamber, experiment 26 was no longer glowing pink. It remained white as if forcibly bleached, and showed no signs of movement. Awaken it. Yes. Unlike Wei's despairing tone, Karaji's voice showed no emotion. Wei pressed the electric shock button with a heavy heart. Bubbles rose inside the test chamber and the bubble amoeba jumped. It wriggled slightly but remained predominantly in a white, almost lifeless state. Fascinating results. Try it again on experiment 26. Are you sure? If you achieve significant results with another attempt, report to me. Wei's face brightened as if he had been given a reprieve from a death sentence. Karaji, who had turned one person's life into heaven and hell with a single word, suddenly felt a gaze and glanced towards the ventilation fan. I sense a gaze again. There was nothing visible beyond the ventilation fan. The experiment I saw earlier had meaning for me too. The psinim they injected into experiment 26 is a substance I'm familiar with. Psinim, a temporary awakening agent that unlocks dormant racial traits. In the game, when you consume psinim, your maximum health decreases, but locked racial traits are unlocked for a limited time. For example, if I were to consume psinim, I could use abilities that are normally unavailable during the human stage for a short time, such as the acidic blood trait gained during the fluid stage or the enhanced exoskeleton trait. Of course, the duration of the effects decreases with each use, making it more of a mid-game item than a late-game one. Does experiment 26 possess hidden traits that I don't know about? Despite having hunted thousands of them before, I hadn't seen any concealed traits. There had never been discussions of this in the community either, so it's possible that experiment 26 was a unique specimen or that differences had emerged in the transition from the game to reality. In any case, learning about the existence of psinim is an achievement. When I engage in full-scale combat against the humans on board the spaceship, it might come in handy. Back at the nest, I relaxed once more. As I did, thoughts I had intentionally avoided began to resurface. It asked me for help. Experiment 26, who had received a massive injection of psinim, had pleaded for salvation. The screams still echoed vividly in my mind. Experiment 26 had begged for mercy, even though the researchers hadn't understood the implications of those waves. Even if they had known, they probably wouldn't have stopped. The unfortunate fact was that this gruesome experimentation wouldn't end here. The Megacorp researchers would likely repeat the psinim experiment until experiment 26 couldn't endure any longer and dies. I knew that there was nothing but darkness in its future. The only reason I had spared Experiment 26's life was because I had deemed its genetic essence useless, otherwise, it would have been a candidate for my meal. But why, even knowing that, did a feeling of discomfort creep up from the depths of my heart? Why did Experiment 26's cries still echo in my mind? I don't like this. Not at all. Given all of this, I didn't seem to be a complete honored amorph yet. I was consumed by anger, but at the same time, I remained in a thoroughly rational state of mind. My judgment was based on the belief that I had enough evidence to target her. Among the achievements I had obtained today, there was information that could be useful concerning Karaji Eugen. She's raising a cat. Using my heightened senses, I could deduce how much she cherished the cat. She seemed like a woman whose veins ran with cold blood, but when she stroked the cat, human emotions were palpable. When her beloved cat dies, it wasn't difficult to imagine how Karaji Eugen would react. There are many vulnerabilities. Obviously, the cat didn't receive any special protection. Besides, when her owner called, it was mostly alone. People on the spaceship hadn't even thought about how Karaji Eugen would react when her cat dies. In other words, using the cat as bait to lure in prey was the core of my plan. Karaji Eugen, you'll die within a few days. Fueled by burning anger and icy calculation, I pronounced her death sentence. Chapter 5. Once the decision was made, all that remained was action. I had spent 2 days observing and investigating the cat's daily routine. After thorough analysis, I came to one conclusion: truly an emperor. I'd wager that even the captain of this ship wasn't as comfortable as this cat. For 6 days, I had been observing the crew, and most of them had a below-average standard of living. For example, the meal menu consisted mainly of low-cost foods, such as synthetic meat and genetically modified grains, with no other advantages. On the other hand, this cat eats only meat every day, thanks to its excellent owner. And not just any meat, but freshly butchered, high-quality meat. This ship had an agricultural area responsible for farming and livestock. It was a place designed to provide gourmet cuisine to the ship's elite and visiting dignitaries, and they were sparingly offering such precious meat to a mere cat. Seeing this, Karaji Eugen is definitely not an ordinary person. She might be a Martian aristocrat, a prime capital of the megacorp, or perhaps both. Both were powerful factions within the megacorp, each exerting dominance over a planetary region. Troublesome social classes. Both classes had extremely high levels of pride and never forgot any grudges. Even the smallest grievances would be remembered, and they would later seek ruthless revenge, often many times over. This had made playing the game quite challenging. Even if I were to kill someone other than Karaji Eugen and escape from the ship, she wouldn't forget me. She would somehow find me and try to kill me. Another reason to kill her. In any case, her status as an owner was one thing, but the crucial question was how to kill that cat. Meow. The cat yawned as if bored. Looking at it lounging on the top-grade cushion, there was no other like it. This was Karaji Eugen's bedroom. I was currently in the ventilation duct connected to the wall near the bedroom floor. I had been watching that lazy creature through the mesh for a while, and the sight of it being so sluggish made me sigh involuntarily. It looks dull, so killing it shouldn't be too difficult. Unlike dogs, cats had retained their wild instincts even after becoming domesticated livestock. They were also naturally excellent hunters. So, I expected it to be a formidable opponent for someone like me, who was merely in the hatchling stage. Of course, it wouldn't win in a fight, but significant bleeding was inevitable. However, seeing it in person made me realize that I was worrying unnecessarily. Looking at its chubby belly, I couldn't help but think it would be delicious, more than anything else. The problem is that it's too lazy. Most of its time was spent rolling around on that cushion. Except when eating or going for a walk in the garden with its owner, it didn't move at all. Still, I can't kill it right here. The amusing fact was that this place had better security than the cargo hold. To the naked eye, the ventilation duct I was in appeared no different from other areas. However, with my heightened senses, I could tell that the bedroom's owner paid extra attention to security, to the extent that it might seem obsessive-compulsive. Laser signal transmitters installed throughout the area were monitoring for illegal intruders. What if I were to enter the room? The AI would immediately inform the guards outside about the presence of an unknown intruder. Then, I'd be finished. They wouldn't even need to use a gun. The guards would kick me, and my insides would explode, killing me instantly. So, I'm stuck here. The cat itself seemed easy to deal with, but the process of approaching it unexpectedly proved to be quite tricky. In irritation, I carelessly shook my tail. Uh-oh. When my tail hit the wall of the ventilation duct, making a noise, the cat's ears perked up. Meow. The cat sprang up, rushing towards exactly where I was. Despite being overweight, its movements were quite agile. As the cat's body collided with the mesh, the laser signal transmitters activated. I could feel the guards outside the door stiffening in response. I couldn't stay here any longer. I gave the scratching cat a brief glance and then retreated from my position. Immediately after I left, the guards stormed into the room. What's going on? What came in? Ugh, the cat's causing trouble again. Again. Ugh, just leave it. Ignoring the grumbling voices of the guards, I returned to my nest. I can't believe I made such a mistake. I had come close to putting my life in danger. I couldn't believe I had been so careless. Could it be that this comfortable nest had gotten into my head? Has my body become numb to stimuli because of the comfort? Tempting the cat with my tail. I must be out of my mind. Wait a minute. While I was berating myself, something popped into my head. Fragments of ideas began to emerge randomly, like puzzle pieces falling into place. I methodically organized the thoughts that were coming to me like a jigsaw puzzle. The cat looked bored, provocation, the reaction of the guards. These were the three key elements. Finally, I had a clue about how to approach and conquer that cat. Cat Caesar was once again spending its time on top of the cushion. When it first left its homeland for this metal monstrosity that reeked of hostility, Caesar couldn't believe it. It scolded its owner, Karaji Eugen, with solemn eyes, but she just ignored its complaints, wearing a somewhat apologetic expression. Caesar was greatly disappointed, but its suffering didn't end there. Its sleeping arrangements were far from comfortable, and the food it received was pitiful. For someone who had lived its entire life eating the finest beef and freshly caught fish, the meals on the ship were unbearable. In fact, Caesar might have fasted for the day. Because its owner had knelt down and pleaded desperately, Caesar had no choice but to eat the miserable meat. Before long, Caesar had perfectly adapted to the new environment, making its initial resistance seem trivial. Life on the ship, where there was almost no change, suited its lazy personality well. Caesar stretched in boredom. It was too lazy to move around much, but it wasn't lacking in feline curiosity. Is there anything interesting happening today? Just as it thought so, it heard a rustling sound from beyond the ventilation duct. Raising its head to investigate, Caesar realized the sound was coming from the passage where the wind was blowing. Join our Discord for release/invite/dbdmdhswa2. Come to think of it, not long ago, something strange had appeared there and caught its attention. Caesar slowly got up. Last time, it had rushed over hastily and missed whatever unknown presence there was. This time, it promised itself it wouldn't miss it. It cautiously approached. As it got closer to the entrance of the passage, it saw a small object. It was a cockroach, partially severed in half. Despite having no chance of survival, the bug was wriggling and trying to escape. Seeing this, Caesar felt its long-dormant predator instincts awakening. Almost involuntarily, it pounced on the cockroach. With its front paws, Caesar toyed with the cockroach until it stopped moving. As Caesar watched the lifeless insect, it felt an unfamiliar emotion. It was an emotion that could be described as fascinating. Caesar's small brain was filled with thoughts like it wished there were more toys around. Through Caesar's eyes, another bug was visible beyond the mesh. It felt disappointed because last time it had touched the mesh, nothing had happened. In frustration, it lightly tapped the mesh and surprisingly, this time it produced a different result. The mesh fell forward. It hesitated for a moment, then crawled into the passage to catch the bug. Hey, what's making that noise again? It's probably the cat. Let's check it out later, it's annoying. After all, where would a cat go? We're guarding it like this. Because it was a cat, Caesar couldn't understand what the guards were talking about outside. Even if it could understand, it was too preoccupied with the bugs to care. Following the scattered bugs in the passage, a bright light entered his field of view. Following the light, it found itself in an open corridor. Meow. After entering the corridor and looking around, Caesar realized that it had never been to this place before. It thought about turning back now, but once again, the sight of a bug mesmerized it. Behind the bug's body was a dark space in sharp contrast to the light in the corridor. Without fear, Caesar jumped into that space. It was a cargo hold. It's coming. I was hiding on top of a container, watching the cat below. The stupid cat was following the bugs without any suspicion. Instinct in animals is absolute. Even if they are tamed by human hands, The genes of a hunter and a predator still exist within them. It's the genes of a hunter and a predator. Meow. The cat approached the container. I was ready to pounce. My blood flowed faster due to tension. My thick and flexible tail, which was in my rear end, was ready to strike at any moment. The 4 pairs of muscles making up my legs contracted, and my body's posture lowered sharply, signaling that I was ready for combat. While my body was getting ready, my loyal subordinate, my super sense, calculated the best time to attack under the owner's command. The transcendent vision unique to amorph pierced through the darkness of the cargo hold beyond the cat and aimed accurately at the cat. Observing the cat's muscles, bone movements, and habits, I concluded that its right eye had lower eyesight than its left eye. Meow. The cat turned its head to the left. With its diminishing eyesight, it couldn't spot me lurking in the darkness. Now was the chance. I used my legs, which were bent almost entirely, as propulsion to lift my body into the air. I didn't use my wings because they made noise. Approaching the cat quickly was enough with the power of gravity. The distance between me and the cat rapidly closed. The cat's ears perked up at the sound of the wind. Its head turned towards me and its pupils dilated. It sensed danger and tensed up, but it was too late. My tail became the assassin's dart, and it stabbed the cat's side. The venom, which would paralyze even an adult, spread throughout the cat's body through its veins. Despite having a much smaller body than a human, the cat had no chance of withstanding the paralysis poison. After being stung, within seconds, the cat's heart stopped. The hunt was successful. I fell to the ground, stepping on the motionless prey, and let out a triumphant roar. The triumphant cry of a predator echoed through the cargo hold, and the inhabitants shivered in fear and awe. Good. Shall we eat now? The ceremony was successfully completed, so it was time to check the reward. I took a bite of the cat's corpse. The sensation in my mouth was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Before I even had a chance to savor the sweet taste of blood, the chewy muscles and the flavorful fat overwhelmed my senses. The feeling was so shocking that it sent shivers down my spine. I had thought that cockroaches, spiders, and calorie bars were edible, but I was completely wrong. The sensation of delicious is exactly what I felt. I gripped my trembling legs and took another bite of the cat. Insane. It wasn't an illusion. The taste of cat meat was so good that it could be the only thing I ate until I died. With my limited vocabulary, it was hard to describe just how delicious a cat was. I didn't think about anything else, I focused on eating the meat. It took less than 5 minutes for the larger cat's corpse to disappear. Sigh. After chewing the bones and licking up every drop of blood that had spilled onto the floor, I was satisfied. Having completed my frenzy of a meal and regained my composure, I could understand why amorphs were so obsessed with meat. It's insanely delicious. I couldn't help but swear, it was such an amazing taste. Even excluding the goal of collecting genetic essence, if meat tasted this good, I would have sought it out intentionally. As I licked the flesh and blood that had stuck to my front paws in regret, a text box suddenly appeared. Predation effect activated. Successfully obtained wild instinct genetic essence from cat. Extracted the wild instinct from the biological characteristics of cat. Do you want to apply the wild instinct? Oh. I was feeling good after eating the meat, and then there was talk of genetic essence acquisition. Moreover, I had no idea that I could obtain genetic essence by eating something for the first time. Wild instinct, huh? A characteristic I've never seen before. Since this was the first time I had eaten a cat, I didn't even know it had a characteristic. I had no idea what effect it would have, but since it wouldn't hurt to have it, I pressed accept. The wild instinct characteristic has been applied. It's possible to fuse it the existing trait super sense. Fusion of wild instinct and super sense traits. Evolving into predator sense trait. Predator sense, the super sense characteristic is enhanced. It allows you to pre-detect threats in the near future based on available information. Note, exceptional hunters have a knack for reading the future. Huh? I stared at the text box, at a loss for words. Chapter 6. Predator sense. I double-checked the characteristics recorded in the text box. Race, unidentified aggressive spacemorph. Status, hatchling. Objective, survive. Special traits, predator sense, fusion, wings, chitinous exoskeleton, robust vitality, paralyzing stinger. I knew that there was a trait fusion system in the space survival game. It was a system that combined 2 or more related traits into one enhanced trait. There were cases where even seemingly useless traits transformed into powerful ones through fusion. So, I actively used it. I had used it so often that I had memorized all the combinations for fusion in the game. Could there be a trait that I don't know about? I had never seen this trait before, no matter how many times I read it. Pre-detect threats. Traits related to future prediction existed in the game, but they were usually implemented to increase evasion rates. To put it plainly, they were mostly good for show and not very useful. But this is reality. How will it work here? I concentrated my senses on the auxiliary organ, similar to when I used super sense. The slender tentacle-like appendage attached to my jaw wriggled and read the information floating in the air more effectively than before. It was capable of collecting a significantly larger amount of information now, far beyond what it could previously gather. I could even identify what kind of insects were in the cargo hold and the shapes of the weapons inside the containers. However, the future-seeing effect I had expected didn't activate. It seemed like there was no immediate threat to me. Perhaps it's passive? It being an automatically activated passive ability didn't necessarily mean it was a bad thing. Threats could strike unexpectedly, so having an advantage like this wasn't a disadvantage. By the way, eating mammals sure gives you a lot more energy. My energy level felt remarkably higher after eating the mammal. Besides the energy boost, I also felt significantly fuller. The skin covering my back and stomach seemed slightly tighter. I returned to my nest with a satisfying sense of fullness. According to historians, the origin of megacorp dates back to when 7 corporations on Earth and Mars conspired to maximize their profits. The government couldn't overlook the merchant guilds overstepping their bounds, so they declared war on the 7 major corporations. Countless people were sacrificed to the extent that blood formed seas. In the end, the final victors were the 7 major corporations. It marked the era when the entire solar system came under the dominion of a single massive corporate consortium, Megacorp. Subsequently, among the 7 corporations that formed the foundation of Megacorp, 5 companies headquartered on Earth became the 5 noble houses of noble capital, while the 2 companies on Mars became the aristocratic prime capital of Mars. Among the 5 noble houses ruling over Earth, the Eugen family had a rather unexpected beginning as a small agricultural company. Eugen's ancestors had recognized the potential of genetically modified food early on and invested heavily in genetic engineering. Even in the space age, this tradition continued, ensuring that the Eugen family possessed outstanding genetic engineering technology that was renowned throughout the galaxy. The fact that Karaji Eugen could become such an exceptional geneticist was largely due to her family's background. From a young age, she displayed exceptional genius, prompting her family to invest heavily in her upbringing. With such a privileged background, she had never experienced any sense of deficiency in her life. Whatever she desired, she obtained without fail, even if she had to wait a little. So why was it so difficult for her to accept the fact that she had lost something she owned for the very first time in her life? When can I see Caesar? The soldiers are searching for him, so if you wait just a bit longer. It's already been 2 hours. Caesar always strictly observes mealtime, so something must have happened. Anyone who knew Karaji would be surprised by her current state. She looked nothing like her usual self. Her well-kept black hair was disheveled, and her usually icy expression was nowhere to be found. Presently, she appeared nothing short of unhinged. Captain Samuel, seeing her in this state, let out a sigh. This is a spaceship. Unless a cat is piloting a rescue ship, he must be somewhere on board. That's why I'm telling you to find him right away. What I mean is that waiting might yield favorable results. Samuel was from Third Capital, originally hailing from Saturn's moon, Titan. He wasn't from the lower class by any means, but compared to the noble houses, he was nowhere near their league. If she asked him to step down from his captaincy, he would have to relinquish his position without question. She held her birthright firmly in her grasp, and he felt as if he were about to lose his mind dealing with her. What's the situation with the guards? They are all detained. Legal procedures can only be carried out upon reaching the destination. Execute them immediately? Yes. Samuel thought he must have misheard. As the captain, you have the authority for immediate executions, correct? Exercise that authority. Are you suggesting executing someone without due process? Other soldiers might revolt. Executing someone. Samuel coughed nervously as he met her intense gaze. Well, what I meant was, isn't it better to discuss the punishment after the search has made some progress? I don't mean anything else by it. Have you forgotten that all of this happened because the soldiers didn't do their job properly? Samuel knew it well, the fact that the ship's crew was far from friendly to cats. Honestly, even the captain himself had a diet consisting of fresh meat only once a week, the rest of his meals were filled with cultured meat. On the other hand, that damn furball gets to eat beef every meal. He couldn't stand that cat himself, but he knew there were soldiers who liked them. Seeing the misfortune that had befallen the cat, it wouldn't be surprising if some of them were pleased. However, if he mentioned this fact, Kazaraji's anger would undoubtedly be directed at him, so Samuel kept his mouth shut. I am well aware of the chief research officer's concerns. I will make sure to discipline the soldiers thoroughly in light of this incident. I'll come back in 2 hours. If there's no progress by then, you might want to consider taking off that hat. After warning Samuel, Kazaraji left the captain's quarters. Where on earth could he be? She hadn't just idly waited while the soldiers conducted their search. She had created a tracker that could determine Caesar's whereabouts through the fur he left on the cushion. The device had worked successfully, but upon seeing the results it produced, she became perplexed. It was because Caesar had gone to a place he could never have reached by conventional means. Caesar had undone the screws of the grill installed in the ventilation duct, made his way to the cargo hold, and then disappeared. It was a situation that clearly involved human intervention, so Kazaraji called the cargo hold supervisor. The supervisor had a solid alibi, he had been drinking with colleagues in the cafeteria all day. However, it was true that he had neglected his duties, so Kazaraji had considered killing him. If the captain hadn't stopped her, the supervisor would have been left to wander the dark expanse of space for eternity. She reluctantly suppressed her anger and meticulously searched the cargo hold, taking the trembling supervisor along with her. Caesar's trail had ended near the containers, and in its place were traces left by an unidentified creature. She collected the traces and analyzed them using a scanner, but all it returned was a message saying no information. Genetic information not found, even in Megacorp's data archives. Even for her, creating a machine to track an entity with absolutely no information was no easy task. It wasn't impossible, but it would take more time than usual. Even if Caesar went without food for that long, he wouldn't die. But Kazaraji couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Something was definitely wrong. Her intuition told her that something terrible had happened in the cargo hold. That's why she had pressed the innocent captain to find Caesar as quickly as possible. Whoever you are, if you've touched what's mine, I'll kill you. She found herself unconsciously biting her nails. The droplets of blood from her nails' edge vividly displayed the owner's emotions. While lying in the nest, lazily digesting my meal, I sensed a change on the ship. The movements of the humans were more agitated than usual. They must have realized that the cat was missing. Thanks to my upgraded auxiliary system, I could roughly perceive the appearance of moving humans. From their solid forms and vigorous movements, it was evident that the search team consisted entirely of soldiers. Soldiers, busy searching for a pet they didn't even like, were rolling on the floor with hunger. It seemed that even in the space age, the absurdity of military life had remained the same. It's all going as expected. There were two main benefits to killing that cat. First, it would cloud Eugen's judgment. Considering her actions and the cat's nutritional status, it was clear that Eugen lavished affection on her pet. While she was a demon to her test subjects and researchers, she was nothing short of an angel to the animals she raised. People who treated only what they cherished with humanity were not uncommon. They had one other common trait. She loses her mind when something's taken from her. It's not that she's worried about her pet dying or being in danger. She simply gets angry at the fact that someone she doesn't know has taken what she possesses. Even if it's the most insignificant thing she owns, she'll react similarly. This emotion can be concluded as irrational possessiveness or, in simpler terms, an obsession. And those who become obsessed find it hard to stay sane. Secondly, it would sow discord between Kazaraji Eugen and the soldiers. The biggest obstacle to my assault on her was the guards. Due to the soldiers following her everywhere, surprise attacks were almost impossible. Even if I managed to eliminate her somehow, if the soldiers spotted me, the losses would outweigh the gains. So, I created an opportunity to distance her from the soldiers. The guards didn't like the cat. They were naturally upset. After all, they were forced to eat cat food, which was barely edible as their rations. In reality, the cat was merely a pretext, and their anger was more directed at the absurdity of their social hierarchy. While being labeled as noble capital, they were being subjected to unreasonable demands. However, they feared the consequences of directly confronting Kazaraji Eugen. Owners may be terrifying, but pets aren't. In simple terms, her cat served as a kind of shield. In that situation, if the sacrificial lamb were to disappear and they were forced to expend unnecessary effort to find the disliked entity, would the soldiers be willing to protect her as before? Not only that, Karaji Eugen would no longer trust the soldiers. The biggest reason for the disappearance of something she cherished was the negligence of the guards. Heh, thank you very much, cat. They probably never imagined that such a useless lump of flesh would bring about this butterfly effect. I got up from my spot. Once you've sown the seeds, harvesting is simply a matter of course. The time had come to extract Karaji Eugen's genetic essence. Chapter 7. What is the essence of amorph play? Space survival games ensure high freedom, but they aren't without established gameplay styles. For example, starting as a megacorp noble capital, the conventional approach is to use initial funding to hire mercenaries or buy ships and roll the snowball, as it's optimized for using mercenaries or slaves due to racial characteristics. So, what's the conventional way of playing amorph? What sets amorph apart from other races? They are hunters. Gathering enemy information in advance, laying traps, luring them, and ambushing them from behind. No matter how many genetic essences you accumulate and become stronger in the late game, the essence of amorph remains that of a hunter. Even in the late game after finishing essence farming, the same formula holds. The reason I could become the best in the game as amorph was simple. I was good at hunting. Unlike other players, I had to fight alone without party members. My physical abilities weren't better than young players. I had fewer equipment and attributes than long-time players. Yet, amidst all these unfavorable conditions, I always trampled over them. I made the genes of those whining and protesting against me my own and copied their unique traits. As trophies of my hunts piled up, my hunting expertise accumulated as well. The more foolish victims didn't give up and continued to challenge me, making me stronger. In this endless cycle, I became the most infamous predator in the world of space survival. That's why I'm now targeting a new prey. Damn. It's taking too long for the stabilization process. Karaji Eugen vented her anger, slamming her desk. She had been observing from above the laboratory for a while, but she hadn't noticed my presence. Her sharp instincts were dulled by anger. She wasn't alone yet, the guards were outside, and the soldiers were patrolling. Damn it. She muttered irritably as she got up from her seat, which had been fiddling with the machine. She went to another laboratory and started manipulating the terminal. I didn't know what she was trying to do, but it didn't seem pleasant for the creatures inside the laboratory. Every time she passed by, the experimental subjects writhed in pain. This bastard, and that bastard too. What she was doing was not an experiment but torture for venting her anger. The laboratory was filled with silent screams. By the way, you're here too. In front of her was experiment subject 26. I could sense its unease even from here. When Karaji pulled out the pseudonym, subject 26 trembled. Was she satisfied with the fact that the subject was afraid? She smiled distortedly. This is an experiment. She injected all the pseudonym. Subject 26's entire body was torn apart, and its body color faded in an instant. Bubbling foam inside the test tube seemed to vividly reflect the subject's screams. After the experiment, which was nothing more than sadistic torture disguised as research, subject 26 came back to life. Karaji pulled back her tongue and left the lab as it was. A woman who only chooses things she doesn't like until the end. I was about to move to track her, but experiment subject 26 sent a ripple my way. Greetings. Even in moments like this, it greeted me as usual. I didn't respond and continued on my way. There was no need for conversation between us. I intended to provide the one thing it truly needed instead, revenge. I left the lab and followed Karaji. She was heading for the captain's quarters, with 2 guards following closely behind her. They seemed displeased, to the point where there was no need for my auxiliary systems to confirm. Karaji appeared to sense this as well but didn't say anything. The tense atmosphere escalated even further when we arrived at the captain's quarters. It's been 2 hours. What's the progress? We've just started the search. Please wait a little longer. Captain, or should I say, Eugen Samuel. Are you defying the will of noble capital? The captain, Eugen Samuel, hardened his face at her words. It looked like he was angry to anyone watching, but it was just for show. Judging by the dilation of his pupils, The sweat trickling down his neck and the trembling of his legs inside his pants, he was clearly in a state of panic. He may be the captain of the ship, but Karaji is part of Megacorp's ruling class. The hierarchy is completely different, so it's natural for him to be afraid. I am the captain of this ship. Research officer, please be cautious with your words. That captain's position can be relinquished. Even if it's noble capital, we cannot tolerate abuse of power. I have the right to detain the research officer. What? You're saying you're going to detain me now? Anyone who disrupts the order on this ship can be detained at the captain's discretion. Are you insane, Eugen Samuel? The situation was getting interesting. It seemed like there had been conflicts between them even before I started observing. Well, with the inhumane Karaji and the captain, who usually avoids confrontation, it might have been an expected outcome. They stared at each other for a while. In the end, Karaji was the one who averted her gaze. Is this somewhat expected as well? If Karaji makes a mistake, the fate of the ship's crew will end there. But laws are distant, and fists are close. This is the middle of space, and even if the captain loses his temper and tries to kill her, she won't be able to resist. Despite her superior intelligence compared to the others, her body is that of an ordinary woman. We'll see about that later. Karaji left the captain's quarters, grinding her teeth in frustration. As soon as she left, the captain called his aide and yelled at him to bring that damn cat right away. It must be urgent. If things continue like this, the captain is as good as dead the moment he arrives at any planet or space station. He had the audacity to threaten her with detention in front of noble capital, so there's no way around it. His only lifeline now is to find the kitten and resolve this issue. But it's already dead. After all, the captain is someone who has been put on my hit list. No matter what he does, he can't escape his fate. Afterwards, Karaji continued to roam the ship, making trouble wherever she went. The more the crew resented her, the better for me. When she disappears from people's sight, it will be easier for me to work. Her last destination was the restroom. She was accompanied by 2 guards. Normally, at least one guard should have accompanied her inside, but these guards had been through a lot of her bullying, so they didn't follow her. I don't know if she noticed that they were disobeying orders due to emotional reasons or if she simply didn't like the guards. Hey, I'm going to the restroom for a bit. Coincidentally, one of the guards also left to go to the restroom. Inside the women's restroom, there was only her and there was only one guard outside. This is my chance. There was no security equipment inside the restroom to hinder my movements. In the ventilation ducts surrounding the restroom, I prepared for the assault. I loosened 2 screws with my claws and carefully removed the grate, making sure not to make any noise. I hung it up while keeping my claws raised. She was in the middle of washing her face at the sink, and the sound of running water masked any noise I might have made. I approached her cautiously, making sure not to cast a reflection in the mirror. After finishing her face wash, she turned off the tap and brushed the water droplets from her hair. I had to get close enough to her to strike with a single leap. My 4 pairs of legs moved with extreme caution, unlike anything she had ever seen. Paralysis poison surged at the tip of my tail. Just like a cat, my body was ready to strike to finish her with a single blow. Phew. Karaji stared at herself in the mirror with a vacant expression. But suddenly, she frowned. Oh no. Was her mind clearer after washing her face? Her senses had detected me. A distress signal from her brain was sent, spreading throughout her body. The muscles in her neck twitched in response. Within a second, her head would turn towards me. There was no more time to delay. My legs pounded against the steel floor. My body, transformed into a deadly projectile, was launched towards her. The distance between us was still considerable, but now was the time to use my wings. I had been eagerly awaiting the command to summon them, and as I gave the order, my wings unfolded wide. My body, previously losing momentum, suddenly shot upwards. Wings with the distinctive glossy luster of chitin gleamed as they vigorously flapped. The distance between us was now about 50 centimeters. I revealed the paralyzing stinger that had been concealed in my tail. Karaji's gaze shifted toward me. Her face contorted rapidly, overcome by a cocktail of negative emotions: surprise, revulsion, imminent danger, and fear. When people are faced with unexpected peril, they instinctively shield their faces with their hands. Her arm began to rise. As her forearm was about halfway to her face, my tail slithered through the gap. It was a flexible maneuver, disarming her defense. At its tip, a small needle pierced her carotid artery. Ah! A short cry escaped from her lips. In reality, she couldn't have screamed for long. The poison coursing through her veins paralyzed her entire body within seconds. Until the antidote takes effect, all she could do was breathe. She collapsed in front of the sink. Her prone form resembled a mannequin, a lifeless imitation. I approached her without mercy. Her quivering eyes reflected my image as I got closer. Dribbling saliva hung from the creature's mouth, resembling a head-sized extraterrestrial lifeform. It grew larger as it approached, revealing sharp teeth inside its mouth. What could she be thinking now? Fear of the alien being she had witnessed. Anger at her situation? Perhaps a fear of death. It didn't really matter. Karaji Eugen was going to die anyway. Snap. My teeth crushed her neck. The light went out in her eyes, and beyond the teeth I was clamping down with, I felt her breath growing shallow. Goodbye. My strong jaws snapped her neck with ease. With a simple shake of the head, her neck tore apart. Her short life had come to an end. The megacorp's noble capital no longer existed on this ship. Only the lifeless body of the woman remained. Human blood flowed through my throat. On the biological conveyor belt known as the digestive system, only genetic information separated and emerged separately. The moment the information reached my brain, I felt it. One piece of the puzzle of potential that had been dormant within me had fallen into place. I instinctively knew it. The genes that make up my existence indicated that they could be rearranged under the spiral of evolution. Hatchling minus metamorph evolution conditions have been met. Would you like to evolve? If I had just agreed, I could have immediately begun the evolution process right there. I was about to accept. Even if my auxiliary systems hadn't sounded an alarm, I would have done so. The guard heard the sound of her falling. His gun barrel was aimed at me. The bullet pierced my body. I died. What was that just now? Multiple scenes passed by swiftly, like rewinding reality and playing it back at multiple times normal speed. If it weren't for my heightened senses, I wouldn't have been able to perceive it properly. A predator's sense. What I had just seen was a warning of impending danger in the future. It was the predator's sense looking ahead into the future and issuing a warning. So, this is how it operates. It was like showing events that would happen in the future, similar to a movie. Except for the fact that it only activated in times of danger, it was a powerful ability. Anyway, the timing for the security guard to enter was imminent. I leapt behind the door and concealed my body. From the future I had seen through the predator's sense, I knew that there was only one security guard who had attacked me. The other one had not yet returned from the bathroom. Should I run? If the security guard found out about my presence, it would be disastrous. Even if Karaji died, I wouldn't be able to evade pursuit. The security guard must be dealt with here. Fortunately, there was only one opponent. If I launched a surprise attack, I could kill him. My body entered combat mode once again. I pressed my body against the bathroom door, causing it to slowly inch open. I could see the tip of a military boot beyond the door. Gradually, his entire body entered the bathroom. Gasp. A voice of surprised human. He was fixated on the corpse lying on the floor. I, hiding behind the door, sprang towards him. My body stuck to his shoulder, and I could sense his shock. He should have reached for his gun immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he brushed his shoulder. In a way, it was a very realistic response. Anyone would react like that when something winged and resembling a desert spider attached itself to their shoulder. However, considering the situation, such an action was not wise. The price of a wrong choice was death. Thanks to the time he gave me, my tail was able to pierce his ear. My tail, having penetrated his ear, was slowly withdrawn. He had been instantly killed by the paralytic poison injected close to his brain. As he collapsed to the floor, the bathroom door closed. Not long after Karaji's death, another unfamiliar security guard also met his end. Outside was quiet. No one had witnessed the deaths of the two people. I need to hurry. Soon, his colleague would return. I quickly restored the grill of the ventilation duct to its original state and hastily left the bathroom. I took a winding route instead of going directly to the nest because there might be unexpected means of tracking. When I arrived at the nest, I activated the text box. Hatchling minus metamorph evolution conditions have been met. Would you like to evolve? The time for evolution I had been waiting for had finally come. After one last look around, I accepted. Mucus for evolution flowed from my body like water. It poured out in such quantities that it encased my entire body. The liquid solidified into a hard shell, layer by layer. If someone were to see me now, they would probably think I was inside some kind of cocoon. It's strange. Inside the cocoon, there was a peculiar sensation that was hard to put into words. To describe it somehow, it was a feeling of being different. A sense that I was becoming an entirely different being. Inside the cocoon, the secretions were reassembling me into something foreign. If I had memories from my fetal stage, this might be what it feels like. If I could perceive the process of my mother's womb creating my existence, it would surely feel something like this. I wanted to open my eyes and see for myself, but it was impossible. Since entering the cocoon, I had completely lost control over my body. The sensation I'm feeling, is it rooted in physical sensation, or does it stem from something like my spiritual existence, perceiving the changes in my body? I don't know. I guess I'll have to think about it. Let's wait patiently. I've done everything I can. I decided to rest in this cozy cocoon until the evolution is complete. Above the cooling room in the ventilation duct. It was a place that until recently had been filled with contaminated air and disgusting fluids pouring out of spores. It had been a space full of impure humidity, but now it was so dry that it was hard to imagine its previous state. All the spores had dried up and the mucus tendrils that had clung to the walls like spider webs had withered like dry branches. In the midst of the ruined nest, there was a cocoon about the size of a young boy. Despite the cold air rising from the cooling room, the surface of the cocoon was rough, like desertified soil. It seemed to be absorbing the moisture from its surroundings. Then, the cocoon shook. Something was moving inside, trying to come out. After a few more shakes, a crack appeared on the surface of the cocoon. The shell fell to the ground, and something black emerged from the inside. It was an alien form, covered in black chitinous exoskeleton, resembling a human arm. At the end of the arm were 4 long fingers, reminiscent of the talons of a bird of prey. Starting with the first arm that protruded, several more arms emerged from the cocoon, breaking through the shell. Finally, the entire cocoon was discarded, revealing its true form. With 4 long arms, 2 smaller arms near its chest, thick and sturdy legs, and a long tail that was about 1.5 times the size of its body, it opened its eyes. With shining ashen eyes, it looked down at its body. Grr. It seemed to smile contentedly. Chapter 8. The airship's conference room. This is where the senior leadership of the ship gathers for meetings when something important comes up. Life inside the ship is usually static. So, when something important happens, it undoubtedly means a serious problem. Everyone in this room was aware of that, but no one could have imagined that a nuclear bomb would go off. What should we do? The one asking the question was the chief medical officer responsible for the crew's health. His gaze was directed toward the empty chair. In any other seat, perhaps, but that one should never remain empty. The empty chair belonged to the chief research officer. Damn it. I don't know. Samuel muttered a curse, but no one in the room pointed it out because they all felt the same way. Samuel splashed his face with cold water. It was bewildering to think about how to handle this situation. He wanted to take drugs or get beaten to forget everything, but Samuel was the captain of this ship. Everyone was waiting for him to say something. Have you identified the cause? When I looked with my naked eye, it seemed the research officer was attacked and killed. It looks like she was slashed with a small saw, but we'll need a detailed examination to be sure. A detailed examination. Does that mean an autopsy? In response to Samuel's question, the medical officer nodded. They both knew that the word autopsy had been mentioned, but it was impossible to carry out an autopsy on the noble capital. Regardless of the family, the noble capital did not like anyone touching a corpse. They were people who cherished their own bodies and did treat others' bodies as playthings. If even the slightest trace of a scalpel were found on the corpse, the noble capital would not leave the medical officer, who led the autopsy, alone. Security officer. How far has the suspect's search progressed? We've checked all the surveillance cameras on board, but there was nothing unusual. The primary suspect, the security guard, is currently being interrogated. Do you think he's the culprit? Based on the information we have so far, it's unlikely. Report as soon as the search results come in. The most important person on the ship had died, and the culprit was unknown. Samuel barely suppressed the urge to abandon the ship and run away. He knew what had become of the researcher who didn't listen to Karaji's words. The researcher had his brain extracted while still alive and became an experimental subject. A promising talent had suddenly become nothing more than a brain floating in a test tube. The same fate awaited anyone who didn't listen. It was hard to imagine what punishment those involved in Noble Capital's death would receive. Everyone knows what happened in the lab. Ugh. If you don't want to end up with just your brain and subjected to electro-torture, you have to come up with some kind of plan. The word brain and electro-torture made everyone in the room shudder. To avoid the worst possible outcome, they all desperately put their heads together. Accident during the experiment? What are you talking about? Think before you speak, navigation officer. We're not talking about just one or two researchers here. How do you expect us to handle this? Sigh, you talk tough. But we're still a middle capital, you know. What did you say? Then how about this? Food poisoning. Then we're screwed upside down. If you want to die, do it alone, tech officer. What did you say? Those who can't do anything besides eating shouldn't dare speak up. Which capital are you from? In a state where anxiety filled their minds, the meeting was not going well at all. The conference room quickly turned chaotic. Amidst the shouting and bickering, someone slammed their desk forcefully. Quiet. He was the crisis management officer who commanded the soldiers. All this internal squabbling only complicates the situation. After calming everyone down in an instant, he paused for a moment and then spoke. Captain, our current location is near planet C8. What's that got to do with anything? C8 is in the territory of the space dogs. Samuel raised an eyebrow, trying to understand what the crisis management officer was trying to say. Are you telling me this because of those pirate bastards? Yes. They attacked us, and I couldn't figure it out sooner because there were no alarms. Samuel stroked his chin. The space dogs were marauders who roamed space, looting and pillaging. They were one of Megacorp's enemies. In battles between fleets, they were always a nuisance, often causing damage even to battleships led by veteran soldiers. If a battleship could suffer damage, what about a research vessel like this one? It was only natural that significant damage would occur. In the process, unfortunate accidents could easily happen. If we report that we were attacked by them, we can probably mitigate the death of the research officer. Of course, Samuel, who was responsible for the crew's safety, would have a hard time avoiding responsibility, but there was a high chance that it would be settled with fines considering the danger of the space dogs. The Noble Capital would also aim their revenge at the space dogs rather than Samuel. It's not a bad idea, but there's a problem. With our weapons, we can't really stand up against the space dogs. Don't worry about that. I have some friends from way back, I'll contact them. The atmosphere in the conference room became strange at his words. Among the senior officers in Megacorp, there were hardly any who hadn't been corrupt. Most of them created slush funds to receive bribes from the top. Even so, Samuel didn't expect the crisis management officer, who seemed strict, to have such connections. This nobleman, he may not look like it, but he's got ties to pirates. Like the thoughts of the others, Samuel also didn't like the space dogs. But there was no other way. How much do you need? At least 1 million credits. Samuel wanted to curse at the amount, which was nearly half of the ship's value, but he held back. It wasn't an unreasonable cost. Dealing with the Noble Capital was just as difficult as dealing with the space dogs. Considering the risk they took, this amount seemed reasonable. Darn it. Spending precious credits like this. Samuel knew this fact, but unexpected expenses were never good. If there were no other options, he had to accept it for now. Alright, I'll get it ready. Thank you, Captain. In exchange, you must handle the job thoroughly. No problem. In the end, the responsibility for this matter was delegated to the crisis management officer. Samuel was about to conclude the meeting when the medical officer raised his hand. What should we do with the body? We'll keep it in storage until the space dogs arrive. Make sure no one else touches it. Understood? With nothing more to discuss, the meeting was adjourned. Samuel left the conference room, hoping he wouldn't have to gather here again. So, this is the metamorphosis. Seeing and experiencing something firsthand that he had only seen in games was a completely different sensation. I looked down at my feet, or rather, hands. When I was a hatchling, I had all 4 pairs of legs to support myself. But now, it is different. Except for 1 pair of legs at the very back, the rest had evolved into what looked like arms. Let's take a closer look at the 4 arms. One pair near my ribs, and one pair near my shoulders. They appeared as if human arm bones were attached to muscles. At the end of the arms, there were hands resembling eagle's talons, with 2 pairs of fingers each arranged vertically. Judging by the sharp claws, it seemed like I could easily tear through human flesh. Combat arms. They were like weapons and shields used to attack or protect against enemies. Of course, I could still do what I used to do before. Small, knob-like protrusions remained between the fingers, allowing them to grip walls or cling to ceilings. It was truly a transformation that suited the terms enhancement or evolution. Let's see. I moved the 4 arms at once. The upper arms had a sense of moving the shoulders, so they felt somewhat familiar, but the lower arms were very alien. Using human terms, it's like the sensation you get in your trapezius when doing chin-ups. If there were some complex mechanism attached to that area, it might feel something like this. It's a fresh sensation. The initial awkwardness was brief, and since it was my own body, after a few movements, I began to get the hang of it. Battle arms are set. Next is this little guy. There were small arms around my chest area. If we consider only their length, they were shorter than the legs during the hatchling stage. Their hands were different from the battle arms, having thumbs like those of primates. They seemed to be here for delicate tasks. Based on the presence of thumbs, the smaller arms seemed to handle intricate tasks such as operating computers or terminals, using weapons and tools, among other things. But the changes didn't stop at the arms. My previous reptilian-like body, which moved on land, had evolved into a bipedal form. In accordance with the change in body structure, the outer covering that had encased my back and abdomen had evolved into an armor-like exoskeleton. Around my chest and below the waist, human-like pelvis and digitigrade legs had emerged. These legs were thicker than the arms and had highly developed musculature. The region that was once my 4th leg had transformed into the present-day bipedal structure. The tail, which had been at my tailbone, had become long and thick, much like a dinosaur's tail. This change likely happened to maintain balance. Together with the tail, the stinger had also grown larger, reaching almost the size of a short sword. I've grown quite a bit in size. When standing, I was just under 1 meter in height. Judging by the length, including the tail, it was almost 2 meters in total. It was a tremendous growth compared to before. Now that I've become a metamorph, I need to change my strategy. Until now, avoiding the enemy's gaze had been the key to survival. But now, things are different. The emphasis on hunting and survival had nearly reached a 50-50 balance. Now that survival is more or less sorted, it's time to think about what's next. Although I plan to loot all the genetic essence within the ship, I needed to plan ahead. What would be my goal moving forward? Race: unidentified aggressive spacemorph. Status: metamorph. Objective: survive, first evolution successful. Special traits: predator sense, fusion, wings, chitinous exoskeleton, robust vitality, paralyzing stinger, enhanced exoskeleton, acidic blood. Type: undetermined. When I displayed the text box, there was new text next to the objective. First evolution successful must refer to becoming a metamorph, right? Amorph status was divided into 6 stages, and it underwent 5 evolutions. Hatchling, metamorph, pre-saint, quasi-saint, saint, and finally ascendant. Reaching ascendant status is considered as clearing space survival. In other words, it's equivalent to achieving a morph's ending. The problem is, reaching the ending is incredibly difficult. Very few players have seen the species ending in space survival. I can check the list of players who have cleared it in the game, and there are only about 20, including me. Among all the amorphs, I was the only one to achieve the ending, which is ascendant. Ascendant. In the game, when an amorph ascends, the secrets of their species' origins are revealed. Where they came from, what their identity is, and other hidden clues are unveiled. It's likely that reality is similar. If I succeed in ascending, I might learn how I became an amorph and why I ended up in the world of space survival. The problem is how to get there. I checked the newly added category in the text box, which was type. Unlockable types do not exist. Would you like to view the list of potential specialized types? Becoming a metamorph marked a significant turning point for amorphs. It was the moment when they determined their type. In comparison to other species, you could think of a type as a profession. The difference was that when you obtained a profession, related abilities were unlocked. However, for amorphs, it worked the opposite way. If you met the conditions, your type would be unlocked, and it would synergize with related abilities. For example, if you had many physical enhancement attributes, you might unlock the physical enhancement type. In that case, your existing physical combat-related attributes would become much stronger. Considering my attributes, I might become the physical enhancement type. I personally liked that type. Especially if the chitinous exoskeleton was enhanced by the type, it would practically turn me into a living tank. Just charging at the enemy could turn them into minced meat. But let's see what's available. View the list. Currently, there are 2 potential specialized types. Physical enhancement type, 6/10, psychic enhancement type, 1.5/3. As I expected, the physical enhancement type had almost fulfilled the conditions. Thanks to the enhanced exoskeleton and acidic blood traits that resulted from becoming a metamorph, I could secure a total of 6 attributes related to physical abilities. But what's this? The number next to the psychic enhancement type was unusual. One has to be the predator senses, but what's the 0.54? None of the attributes I have can explain that. To obtain genetic essence, you had to consume almost the entire corpse. Judging by the 0.5 designation, it was probably due to leftovers or failed acquisitions for some reason. I recalled the things I had eaten so far. Spiders, cockroaches, cat. Among them, there was no creature capable of having psychic abilities. I never left any leftovers before. Oh. I remembered. Karaji Eugen. She was the only one I left behind. I noticed she had a strong 6th sense. Could it be because of psychic powers? In the game, while individuals with psychic powers were rare among humans in Megacorp, they were not non-existent. Perhaps she had latent abilities she herself was unaware of. I definitely have to consume psychic powers. The physical enhancement type was a matter of personal preference, but psychic powers were a different story. Having them or not made an enormous difference. Let's find the corpse. I used my JAWS auxiliary system to check the airflow. Considering the temperature, humidity, and the condition of the dried-up nest, I estimated that I had been in the repair state for about a day. By now, post-mortem rigidity should be in progress, and I needed to consume the body quickly before it began to decay. The more damage to the corpse, the harder it would be for me to acquire the genetic essence intact. Let's start with the corpse. I decided to leave the nest recovery for later and prioritize obtaining the traits. I exited the refrigeration room. The first place to go is the bathroom. There should be traces of where Karaji went in that direction. I followed those. As I headed toward the bathroom, I found myself detouring into the hallway. There were areas where I couldn't navigate with my enlarged body. Maybe it's because it's nighttime, but there's no one around. The auxiliary systems that had grown to tentacle-like proportions were not just longer but had also become more intricate. Although the range hadn't expanded, they had become more detailed. No human presence was detected within a 50-meter radius. The only movement was the mumbling of people sleeping soundly in their beds in the bedrooms. Beyond a fork in the hallway, my auxiliary systems alerted me that guards were stationed in front of the bathroom. I could sense the vibrations in the air they created with their yawning. The guards who had been on duty all night showed signs of fatigue. Not the right time now. The fact that the enemy's condition wasn't normal was an advantage for me, but their numbers were too many. Besides, I had already traced the traces of the corpse. I decided to save dinner for later and moved in a different direction. I continued down the corridor, following the traces. Except for the hallway in front of key facilities, there were no surveillance cameras, so I could proceed without being monitored. As I walked, I entered an area where the ventilation duct expanded. I crawled up toward the ceiling. Even as the location changed, my senses didn't miss the scent of the body. While I was crawling, the smell of meat wafted up from below. The mortuary. The place where the deceased were laid to rest. The space where the dead found their final peace was right below me. Chapter 9. It's an era where life isn't valued. Nowadays, no one feels repulsed by purchasing human lives with money. The interesting thing is that even in such a dystopian society, we still have a culture that honors the dead. They're preserving these bodies that could simply be discarded into space like this. In the mortuary, 2 bodies I created are laid to rest. If there were no guardians, I would have gone down and devoured them right away. 3 outside, 1 inside. Perhaps because 2 people have died, the armament of the guards outside wasn't ordinary. All 3 of them were in reinforced suits. Alone, I could have taken them on, but 3 would be too much. If the fight dragged on, more of their comrades would gather, so it's best to avoid combat with them. The person inside is a civilian. Seeing the smell of disinfectant and formaldehyde emanating from the body, it seemed that the opponent was a doctor. He had earphones plugged into his ears and was listening to music. Is there any way other than a surprise attack? The problem was that the doctor's face was facing the direction of the ventilation ducts. No matter how much he was blocking his ears, if I went down like this, I would be caught immediately. I need to divert his attention. Disrupting prey is also a basic hunting tactic. Luckily, I had just learned a new ability, so I should try using it. First, I moved to a different spot. The doctor's vision didn't reach there. With my forearm, I lightly scraped a forearm where the doctor's sight couldn't reach. Black blood oozed out from the thin wound. Droplets of blood fell onto the alloy plate, and the alloy plate emitted a pungent smoke. The acidic blood trait. It's one of the abilities I acquired automatically when I evolved into a metamorph form. It's a trait that damages nearby enemies by acidifying blood. Both the enhanced exoskeleton and acidic blood may seem defensive, but the true value of this trait lies elsewhere. It's useful for infiltration and armor destruction. It's stronger in acidity than chemical weapons, so it can easily dissolve alloy structures. It can be used to melt the enemy's armor at the beginning of the battle or to infiltrate the enemy's base or spaceship. What's that smell? The doctor reacted to the pungent gas emitted by the melting ceiling. He pinched his nose and turned his head repeatedly. Why is that? His gaze reached the ceiling with holes. The acidic liquid was now melting even the stainless steel cart. The doctor stood up from his seat and approached the melting cart. The fruit was ripe enough. It had to be harvested before it rotted. I opened the ventilation duct and jumped down. Due to the smell and his earphones, the doctor couldn't perceive my movements. Landing gracefully on the floor, I slowly got up. Acid solution? Where is it leaking from? Realizing that the smell was toxic gas, the doctor quickly covered his mouth and nose with his coat. While he was staring up at the messed up ceiling, I got closer and closer to him. Security. Ugh. When he turned around, I was right in front of him. Although he was taller than me, he couldn't feel the difference at all. He was overwhelmed by my appearance. A chitinous exoskeleton that shone as black as the abyss of space. 4 gigantic arms long enough to touch the ground when extended and thick, powerful legs. A tail so strong it could penetrate through alloys. Jaws powerful enough to crush human bones as if they were nothing. Before him stood a creature that seemed to have emerged from the depths of a nightmare, a profound and eerie terror. The creature's mouth opened. Independent of its will. He could feel air rising from the lungs, attempting to rush through the vocal cords as if it wanted to escape. He tried to scream, but failed. A tail, almost a meter long, was now lodged in his mouth. The sharp stinger pierced through his tongue and into the back of his skull. GGG. His body trembled, shaking in the wind like a weed. Foam flowed continuously from his mouth, staining the once white gown he wore with the evidence of a fading life. His dilated pupils gradually returned to normal, life draining from his fear-filled eyes. The prey had died in this manner. Withdrawing its tail, the creature gently placed the lifeless doctor on the ground. Fortunately, the guards stationed at the door seemed oblivious to the murder that had just occurred. Their movements remained unchanged. It wasn't a hunt I was counting on, but it was successful. To be honest, it wasn't a bad outcome. Thanks to this, the count of prey had increased to 3. Leaving the doctor's body behind, the creature began searching for Karaji. Most of the refrigerators for storing corpses were empty. After all, in a place like this, little more than a research vessel, how often would people die? Finding her wasn't too difficult. On a cold cart lay the lifeless body of Karaji Eugen. Her severed head and neck remained detached. It didn't take much to guess the reason. She must be a noble capital. They wouldn't allow anyone to touch the bodies. Chemical processing could potentially damage a corpse, so it made sense that the doctors would leave them as they were. The creature reached out and lifted her severed neck. With her eyes closed, she appeared to be peacefully asleep. Seeing her like this, it felt strange, a peculiar emotion. No matter how much I've adapted to space survival, I'm still a typical college student preparing for graduation. Yet here I am, having killed a person. Is that all? I'm about to eat a person too, and yet I feel no guilt whatsoever. They say there's evil in every human's heart. Has my environment changed, and with it, myself? Have I become this ruthless killing machine, my true nature? There's no use thinking about it. After all, apologizing for killing 3 people and saying I'm sorry won't make them leave me alone in the first place. To stay alive, I have to keep killing. That's how a morph survives, and it's the way I need to adapt. Let's eat for now. Having completed my evolution, I was quite hungry. Thinking about it with a corpse already in front of me was pointless. I opened my flexible jaw wide. Like an anaconda, my gaping maw swallowed the human head whole. Sharp teeth tore through flesh and my crushing force, which could bend steel, shattered the skull. The already non-functional brain was crushed, and brain matter oozed out. Tastes good. As expected, it was an extraordinary taste. I felt like a fool for hesitating so much about killing people. Life is like eating lobster. Once you crack the thick and sturdy skull, the tender meat inside flows smoothly down the throat. The 2 eyes, of which there are only 2, burst like cherries on a cake, delivering an exquisite flavor. The hair was a bit rough, but I considered that part to be a matter of personal preference. All in all, the taste of a human head was quite interesting. It was naturally delicious, but how could I describe it compared to a cat? A different dimension of flavor. That seemed like an appropriate way to put it. What I mean is, a cat can be compared to a franchise fast food restaurant. It's a form that competes with a taste that has been rigorously tested and validated through strict experiments. It's closer to a stimulating taste that immediately captivates your brain. But humans are different. Like a seasoned chef who has spent years preparing a dish, the taste is complex. Just as a craftsman puts his life into his cooking, humans are the same. Since their entire life is absorbed into them, their taste can't be simple. I finished eating the head in one go, and the hunger, like a stamp imprinted by my species, urged me on. I had to finish all the remaining bodies. I continued to devour the remaining parts of her, following my instincts. The body feels different. When I tore off a leg and bit into it, the ratio of muscle to fat was fantastic. The cat I had eaten before had a muscle to fat ratio close to 1:9, but Karaji had a more suitable ratio for consumption. It was as if someone had genetically engineered her to perfection. The skin and muscles were firm and chewy, providing the joy of eating, while the bones were hard, offering a satisfying crunch. The organs in the abdomen were as soft as well-cooked tomatoes. As I was enjoying my meal, I chewed on something foreign in my mouth. I spat it out onto my palm, and it turned out to be a small, button-shaped mechanical device. Did this come from her heart? I couldn't tell if it was a heart rate monitor or some other kind of machine. It didn't seem like something you typically find, but maybe her heart had a problem. I didn't pay much attention to it and crushed the device underfoot. Afterward, nothing artificial came out of her body. Just like when I ate the cat, I left no trace of blood. Predation effect activated. Successfully obtained psychic organ genetic essence from human biological traits. The psychic organ has been obtained. Would you like to apply the psychic organ? Of course. A psychic organ, as expected. Karaji Eugen had the psychic power trait, just as I had anticipated. Among other races, excluding cults and some species, the use of psychic power requires a psychic organ. Why does it have to be a psychic organ? Amorph was one of the species that could use psychic powers without a psychic organ. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to use my enhanced sensory abilities, and I would have died quickly. But now, the psychic organ trait Karaji gave me was essentially a dud. Well, let's not think negatively. You can't fill up on just one bite. Most of the time, things don't work out as well as you expect. Since I needed to secure my types, I decided to think positively about it. When I chose to accept, a signal came from the back of my head. There was a sound of flesh tearing, and something sprang out from the inside. As I explored the large arm around the back of my head, it turned out to be a cluster of small tentacles. Amorph's psychic organ took the form of tentacles, unlike humans. So this is what Amorphs looks like. It's fascinating. Even when playing the game, I had never obtained a psychic organ. It was a rule not to collect unnecessary traits. Who knows, though? You never know what might happen in this world. Maybe the psychic organ would luckily fuse with other traits to become useful. Considering the precedent of the predator sense. After fiddling with the tentacles for a moment, I decided to focus on my dinner again. When I opened the compartment where Karaji was stored, there was the body of a security guard. He had died protecting Karaji, and now he was my dinner. I pulled out the body and took a big bite. Ugh! The taste of the security guard was subtle. It wasn't that it tasted bad or anything, but it was just plain delicious compared to Karaji, who had the taste of a cat with rich juices flowing. I wasn't sure why there was such a difference, but I decided to appreciate it for its energy supply. The abundance of muscles might have contributed to the enjoyable chewing sensation, making it feel like I was eating intestines. While I was eating the security guard, I heard a noise from outside. The battered auxiliary device wriggled and decoded what was happening outside. The security guard is changing shifts. There didn't seem to be many reinforced suits on board the ship, so the guards were passing them to the newcomers. I had obtained valuable information that there were few reinforced suits available, but a problem arose. The doctor will change shifts too, right? It had been about 40 minutes since I started eating Karaji. If someone came in to change shifts, they would surely notice that the doctor was missing. Soldiers were standing outside, and someone was disappearing inside. It was suspicious by anyone's standards. We are in the age of space travel now. In a world where there were as many unknown extraterrestrial beings as there were stars in the sky, how would people react to this situation? They'll probably think there's a monster in the same space as them. It wasn't desirable for people to be suspicious. If someone thought they were being targeted, their natural instinct would be to heighten their guard. I'm not strong enough to engage in a full-scale battle with the enemy yet. Until I became stronger, suspicion should fall on the other crew members, not me. As I contemplated the doctor's body, a cart entered my field of view. Smoke was rising from the cart, which was now unrecognizable due to the corrosive blood. Smoke. Coincidentally, I was in the mortuary, where various chemicals, including embalming agents, were stored. Suddenly, an interesting idea came to mind. It was a very useful method to not only survive but also torment the crew members while overcoming my crisis. Chapter 10. Officially, Megacorp doesn't have a capital city. The entire nation has been corporatized, replacing all terms with words used by companies. For example, the Space Marines are referred to as the Crisis Management Team, and the department overseeing various industries is called the Resource Management Team. Even though they don't use the term capital, there is a place that could be called the center of Megacorp, and that place is Earth. They refer to it as their headquarters. On that Earth, the heart of Megacorp was established. 5 corporations had contributed to the founding of Megacorp, and they were the kings of Earth. Among these 5 major families, the Eugen family, which had its roots in what was once called East Asia, stood out. Eugen Agriculture, which started as a small business in South Korea, never forgot its origins, even after becoming a giant corporation that dominated the galaxy. The ancient capital of a country that no longer existed had become the Eugen family's mansion. It wasn't a metaphor, the entire city had become the residence of the Eugen family. Inside the gigantic dome-shaped mansion, there were maglev trains and small aircraft for transportation, and even an artificial sun for the internal ecosystem. Compared to other planets, this place was ahead by about a century. Here, millions of tools served the members of the Eugen family and attended to their needs. Amidst all the high-tech marvels, there was an old cabin and a garden. This was the residence of the head of the Eugen family, Akira Eugen. Akira Eugen, the Sun King of the solar system, had served as Megacorp's CEO 3 times in a row. Despite being over 200 years old, thanks to genetic modification treatments, he looked no older than middle age. 2 men in suits stood near the garden. One was an elderly man with white, combed-back hair, and the other was a younger man. They had been waiting here for an hour already. Though there might have been some discontent, they remained silent. Dogs don't bark until their owner commands them. They waited for Akira to finish his business. Akira, who had been working the fields with a hoe, finally stood up. "You've waited a long time. Come here." In response to Akira's words, the younger man approached him. "What's the matter?" "It's about the young lady." "Young lady?" Akira raised an eyebrow. The man added a few more words. "It's Miss Karaji." "Oh, the third daughter." Only then did Akira remember, and he smiled as if he had just recalled something. The corners of the old man's eyes, who had been silently observing, twitched slightly. "Right. What about Karaji?" "The young lady's signal device has been destroyed." The meaning of those words was clear. Karaji Eugen was dead. Akira frowned at those words. "That can't be. I never assigned anything burdensome to Karaji. The last signal came from C8. It's space dog territory." Listening to the man's words, Akira nodded and raised the hoe he had been holding. He then brought it down on the man's head. The man with the hoe stuck in his head couldn't even scream and slumped down. Akira didn't stop there, he pulled the hoe out and continued to strike the man's face. The sound of flesh being mashed filled the garden. With blood and brain matter on his face and hands, Akira tossed the hoe onto the corpse. Dispose of it. Yes. The old man flicked his fingers as if this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. At that moment, two men in black suits entered the garden from outside, picked up the body, and swiftly disappeared. The hoe is rather useless. Our most important tools are the people. You know that, right? Yes, I will be cautious. Good. The reason the man died was simple. Akira answered unasked questions twice. 10 billion credits have been spent on raising Karaji. That's an amount comparable to the development cost of a new battleship. Even genetic modification treatments were performed on her frail body. Do you think pirates or the like would be able to touch her? Akira took a towel from his pocket and wiped his face. I wonder who would dare harm the heir of the Eugen family. Karaji's ship. Was the captain Eugen Samuel? Yes. Then it's closer to Saturn, right? That's where the Samuel family has influence. The Samuels were a primate capital that held sway over Mars. While they couldn't compete with the noble capitals, they still vied for the position of megacorp's rulers. Then, could it be Eden's plan? No, Eden's heir is a coward. He doesn't have the courage to challenge the Eugen family like that. The heir he mentioned is the current head of the Eden family, known in society as the Tiger of Mars. He was considered a lesser figure compared to Akira, who held such an imposing presence. The butler was aware of the fact that while the head of the Eden family was assassinated twice, Akira assumed the role of the Eugen family's master. Therefore, the butler could confidently assert that the old man before him had the right to make such a statement. If it's not Eden, then who could it be? Ah, well. What do you think? I think it might have been T&C's doing. The butler replied promptly. Akira seemed to like this response, and his eyes crescented in approval. Haha, we seem to be on the same page. T&C and Eden may seem to be at odds over Jupiter's dominion, but they are secretly working together. After all, Eden's credits come from T&C. The butler didn't show it, but he was internally shocked. He had only been speculating, and he had no idea that the two parties had actually formed an alliance. The fact that T&C, the rulers of Earth, and Eden, the Martian nobility, had joined forces was a top-secret matter, known to only a handful of people aside from the heads of the two families. Unfortunately, Akira was one of those who knew. That snake-like brat probably plans to dominate the board before the council meeting. You must know that, too. Akira handed Butler a blood-soaked towel. Yes. T&C's family head, Samdam Chemblin, is eyeing your position, my lord. I see. That audacious little punk. It seems he's not afraid to target me. The situation seemed quite entertaining to Akira, who burst into laughter while covered in blood. The butler, who had been silently waiting, remained unfazed. He had seen Akira's actions for decades and felt no emotion now. Akira suddenly stopped laughing, as if his previous mirth had been a lie. His face was devoid of any expression. That's right. That arrogant little brat. He must be planning to outmaneuver me before the council meeting. We have the rightful claim, so let us strike first. Inform everyone in the family. Yes. And for the first time, life returned to Akira's emotionless face as his eyes lit up. Anyone who has damaged my assets should be killed. Eugen Samuel of the Samuel family and anyone even remotely related to his ship. Bring them all to me. Yes. There's a shadow infiltrator near C8. Contact them and take care of it. Understood. The term shadow startled the butler. Shadow referred to a special unit directly under the family head, made up of genetically modified mutants with extreme enhancements, known for their immense combat abilities and ruthless efficiency. It looks like a storm is brewing. Once the shadows were deployed, the fate of Eugen Samuel and his subordinates was sealed. The future held nothing but a gruesome destiny for them, to the point where death might be considered a mercy. With a small measure of consolation sent to those somewhere out there in the cosmos, the butler quietly withdrew. Meanwhile, on some distant corner of Earth, a massive war and ruthless slaughter were unfolding. On Samuel's ship, chaos reigned due to an unexpected disaster. What the hell is going on here? Samuel was on the verge of collapsing. Before him lay what used to be the mortuary, but now only ashes remained in the place where it had been. A sudden fire had razed it to the ground. The crisis management officer summoned his subordinates. What the hell happened? Well. You see. Under the sharp gaze of the crisis management officer, the soldiers nervously explained what they had witnessed. We smelled something strange inside, sir, and saw smoke coming out. So we decided to investigate. Is that so? According to the soldiers, during their watch, they had detected an unusual smell and smoke emanating from inside. As they were not supposed to enter except for the doctor, they had waited for a relief doctor to arrive. As time passed and the smoke didn't dissipate, the soldiers reluctantly opened the door and entered. What greeted them was not the doctor but a raging fire. I don't understand. How can there be a fire in a place where there's only corpses? What happened here? The chief of the medical team, who had arrived late, was shocked at the scene. Seeing the state of their captain, who was unable to respond, the crisis management officer briefly explained the situation. Having heard the story, the medical officer stiffened his expression. It's possible that the chemical compound stored in the morgue ignited, but it's highly unusual for a fire of this magnitude to occur. What do you mean? The medical team leader sealed his lips, cautiously glancing around. Artificial fire. Just as the medical officer had said, if there was an arsonist among the crew, the situation was grave. Moreover, the intent to set fire to the place where the research team leader's remains were stored was glaringly suspicious. Let's start by examining the bodies. That's a good idea. After extinguishing the fire, the soldiers took out the bodies. The medical officer meticulously examined the charred remains. This person was one of the team members working overtime. Checking from the upper body to the head was particularly difficult due to severe burns, but they could identify the subordinate by the ring on their hand. As the medical officer contemplated the bitterness of the subordinate's death, he completed the autopsy of the remaining bodies. Then, he realized that someone was missing. Are all the bodies here? Yes. Why do you ask? The medical officer moved to another location with the captain and other officers. He revealed that some of the bodies were missing, a fact that others couldn't bear to hear. The security guard and the research team leader's bodies are missing? Yes. They didn't just walk away on their own. Is there any possibility of that happening? Medical officer, did you see it correctly? I double-checked it several times. Only 2 bodies are missing. Following the death of the research officer, now a mysterious arson case had unfolded. Someone from within is attacking us. That fact crossed everyone's minds. Not ghosts, but could it be unidentified extraterrestrial life forms on board? Hey, is this some kind of joke? Stop with the nonsense. It's just a suggestion. What's got the material management officer so worked up? It's nothing. More importantly, the biggest problem is the missing body of the research officer. Didn't we agree to rendezvous with pirates at C8? The question raised by someone was met with a visibly concerned expression from Samuel. If they lost Karaji's body as well, he would have no cards left to play. Samuel urgently ordered, we must find the body at all costs. Do you understand? Shouldn't we focus on finding the culprit first? Damn it. This isn't just my problem. If you're worried about Noble Capital's retaliation, then cooperate as much as possible. Samuel's words were correct. Karaji Eugen's death was inevitable, but not being able to secure the body left no room for excuses. At the very least, they had to keep the body intact, or else a future more dreadful than death awaited them. Crisis Management Officer. Yes, Captain. Did you try contacting them? Yes, as soon as the meeting ended. Damn it. Let's not talk about this. Just make sure the body is transferred properly. Are you sure? If we found it and can't figure out how to handle it, that's also a problem. Just make sure to find it before the rendezvous. It was a risky gamble, but the crisis management officer didn't point that out. Samuel might not know, but he had different thoughts in mind. Like an assassin concealing a dagger in their bosom, he nodded with an emotionless face. Following the crisis management officer, Samuel summoned the officer of the security team. The security officer was visibly shaken because he was not without responsibility for the messed up situation. Samuel placed both hands on his shoulders. You know, we have to catch the culprit. I'm already doing my best. Your best isn't enough. You have permission to search all the crew members if you need to. Find the culprit, and I'll delegate all authority concerning this matter. Although the captain offered to transfer all authority, the security officer's expression remained grim. Can we really catch them? He wasn't confident, but he couldn't admit it. Very well, we will definitely find them. I trust you. The security officer. reluctantly responded with a show of confidence. While everyone was in a state of confusion, the culprit who had caused this situation from the ceiling vent was silently observing them. As the officers dispersed, it followed one of them discreetly. Things have worked out very well. A way to hide my identity and disrupt the enemies, that was the fire. Setting fire to the chemical compounds inside the morgue was an act almost unimaginable for an extraterrestrial being. Of course, they might find it suspicious since no one from the outside came in, but they wouldn't suspect it was done by a human. They wouldn't doubt themselves. After consuming the security guard's body entirely, I collected the chemicals inside the morgue. Dropping a few drops of acidic blood onto the toxic substances, the flames quickly erupted. Enhanced exoskeletons are fire-resistant. The flames enveloped my body, but I hardly felt the heat. I calmly passed through the fire and ascended to the morgue's ceiling. I waited a little away from the morgue, and people began to gather. The fire had quickly been extinguished, but most of what was inside had turned into ashes. The bodies had been well taken care of, but there was one moment when things nearly got dangerous. I can't believe they brought up the topic of extraterrestrial life forms. I thought my cover would be blown thanks to the perceptive officer. But it got buried thanks to the material management officer's outrage. After that, the captain and the officers kept pouring out important information, not realizing I was listening. Pirates, huh? The captain has really lost it. Space dogs, I know them well. It's a coalition of various species who engage in piracy, self-proclaimed conquerors of the cosmos yet labeled as cosmic trash by others. They occasionally take on mercenary work, but they'll betray you at the slightest provocation. Sometimes it's said that trusting space dogs is worse than trusting a morph who doesn't make any sense. Speculation suggests that the captain planned the docking to shift the blame for Karaji's death onto the pirates. If he had known a bit more about the space dogs, he would never have made such a choice. It doesn't seem like the captain made that foolish decision himself, someone must have influenced him. It seems like the crisis management officer was leading it. I should keep an eye on him. Perhaps he's in cahoots with the pirates. What should I do if the pirates attack this ship? It's not all good or all bad, there are pros and cons. One advantage is that the space dogs are composed of various species, so the range of genetic essences I can obtain is broader. If the pirates were to raid the research ship, I could easily acquire various genetic essences. The downside is that the genetic essences I can obtain from the research ship will be reduced. I don't know how many people are on the pirate side, but from what I've seen, the chances of this research ship winning are slim. Even the soldiers on guard are in a situation where they've had to put on their reinforced suits, so they won't be able to defeat the pirates, who are treating looting and fighting as if they were eating. Most of the crew will die in battle, and then my intake of genetic essences will decrease. Let's put this part on hold. I'll probably need to assess the pirates' level before making a judgment. While lost in thought, the meeting ended. Everyone went back to their tasks, but my super senses detected something unusual. That person, the material management officer, who strongly denied my presence, seemed off in some way. He appeared fine on the outside, but something was amiss inside. His heartbeat was faster than the others, and cold sweat dripped from the hidden areas of his clothing. These were typical symptoms of nervousness. Why was he so nervous? He couldn't possibly have anything to do with this situation. I was initially going to return to my nest, but I became intrigued. I followed behind the material management officer. Even as he walked, he constantly glanced behind him. Why would he react like that unless he's hiding something? He continued to walk cautiously, and then he stopped in front of the cargo hold. Chapter 11. Cargo container? The officer hesitated for a few minutes in front of the cargo container. After confirming that no one was coming, he entered the password. As the door opened, he entered briskly, as if he didn't want anyone to see him. While there was a cargo container manager, it wasn't unusual for the material management officer to know the password due to his position. But why hide something like this? It would have been more natural to enter confidently rather than being so cautious. He didn't emerge from the cargo container for over 30 minutes. When I tracked the officer's movements using auxiliary sensors, I noticed that he was repeatedly wandering around the cargo container. After an hour of seemingly meaningless actions, he left the cargo container. I decided to enter the empty cargo container. Dust and the smell of metal mixed in the air. The rough grating-style floor beneath my feet replaced the smooth alloy plates I had walked on earlier. Maybe due to my increased size, each step I took produced a noticeable sound. It seemed that hunting cockroaches would no longer be possible. Well, now I might have to resort to eating humans or livestock. With my increased size came greater strength, but it also meant increased energy consumption. I began to trace the remnants left by the officer, his sweat, the foreign substances stuck to his feet, and the traces they left behind served as my guide. The place where he had stayed the longest was in front of a particular container. I'll need an ID card and fingerprint recognition for this. Containers seemingly connected to the officer had a higher level of security compared to others that only required the caretaker's ID card. It's not even detectable with my enhanced senses. The wall seemed considerably thick, and even with my enhanced auxiliary sensors, I couldn't determine what was inside. One thing was clear: the officer was hiding something important. My curiosity grew with every moment. Should I make the material management officer my next target? Originally, I had planned to target the chief medical officer. However, considering the current situation, it didn't seem easy. They would undoubtedly be extremely cautious, knowing more about the suspicious deaths of their subordinates than anyone else. In that case, it might be easier to focus on an easier target. The cargo container manager and the entire material management team seemed to be acting strangely. If that were the case, even if the officer disappeared, would no one suspect anything? That became my new goal. Officer, please stop drinking now. Just one more drink, just one more. Why are you acting so differently today? Lately, the material management officer didn't seem to be living his usual life. In addition to his material management duties, he had a small side business obtaining prohibited organisms from the black market and selling them to the upper echelons. Before boarding the ship, he had acquired something from the black market, an unusual egg not registered in the Megacorp database. He had dealt with all sorts of rare animals, but this was the first time he had seen an egg like this. According to the cult merchant who sold it, it was an egg obtained from a forgotten ancient ruin. Ancient creatures, damn. Regardless of its origin, he smelled money. After buying the egg, he contacted his trading partner, who also showed immediate interest. They agreed to make the trade on a planet where the research ship would dock midway. He secretly loaded the egg onto the ship. Until then, he had believed that everything would work out well. Until the mortuary fire incident happened. When he heard the words uttered by a certain officer as if passing by, he couldn't help but wonder. The words suggesting the misdeeds of extraterrestrial creatures. He immediately went to the cargo container to check. The container door was slightly ajar, and inside, one of the eggs that should have been quietly sleeping was empty. Damn, I should have checked it earlier. After boarding the ship, he had only checked the eggs once to see if they were all right. If only he had properly closed the container door that day, even if the egg hatched, nothing would have happened. No, more than that, if he hadn't been drinking that day, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. Alcohol is the enemy. Alcohol. Captain, let's go in now. Because of one missed door inspection, 3 people had perished. Moreover, among the deceased was a noble capital. Even though the monster that had awakened from the egg and killed people was probably still roaming the ship, the officer couldn't go anywhere to complain. Before the retaliation of noble capital, he was terrified that the captain might lose his sanity and try to kill him. That's why the officer spent every night drowning his fears in alcohol. Sigh. His team members shook their heads and left the bar. The bartender next to him licked his lips. I'll close the door. Just one more drink. Just one more and then I'll go. With each gulp of synthetic alcohol, his torment was diluted. While he claimed that alcohol was his enemy, his body remained as usual. In the end, the officer, once again, left the bar in a drunken state. Damn. What's bothering me so much? The officer muttered a curse mixed with a tremor. The corridor he stood alone in was locked in silence. Except for the faint vibrations generated by the ship's atomic reactor, which served as the heart of the ship, there was almost no other sound. It was because night had arrived upon the ship. In space, the concept of day and night didn't exist, but human ships artificially created night at certain times for the crew's rest. The research ship led by Captain Samuel was no exception, so an artificial night had descended upon the ship. Stumbling through the silence, the officer walked. It was a corridor he had always walked, but today it felt strangely unfamiliar. Was it because of the alcohol? In a familiar space, he felt an unknown chill. Beyond the bright corridor lights, a terrible danger seemed to lurk, pressing him with an ominous premonition. Ah, for fuck's sake. The officer denied his own premonition and with a tongue-tied curse, he headed for his quarters. In the corridor, Made of high-strength composite panels with no gap in sight, the sound of his shoes echoed. His ears caught an unfamiliar sound. At first, he thought it was the sound of his own footsteps, but it was different. It was too faint for a human. It was like a soft, low sound as if a wild beast were tiptoeing to hide its footsteps. An eerie feeling washed over the officer, and he stopped in his tracks. As he did, the footsteps following him abruptly ceased. The corridor enveloped in silence. The officer shivered all over. Something unknown was following him. "Who's there?" he shouted, but there was no answer. It felt like someone had forcefully poured cold water over him. He sobered up instantly and quickened his pace. His shoes made a discordant noise as they struck the hard metal floor. Step by step, the eerie footsteps following him seemed to quicken. Thud, 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 thud. What the hell is this? He didn't know if it was a prank by one of his team members. Even if it wasn't a team member, there could have been a way to confront whoever was playing this disgusting trick head-on. But he didn't. From a corner of his alcohol-clouded mind, a feeling was screaming at him. Never confront that presence. After turning the corner in the corridor, the officer glanced back for a moment. The officer saw it clearly. A shadow with a long tail reminiscent of a snake passed by in an instant. This damn thing. It was it. An extraterrestrial creature that killed people. The space killer that had devoured the research officer and the security guard had set its sights on him. The officer's movements became frantic. Thanks to the alcohol in his system, his legs felt sluggish. His appearance resembled a deer shot by an arrow, fleeing. Damn, 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 damn. His face was a mess of saliva, tears, and mucus. His clothes had long since been soaked with cold sweat, rendering them ineffective. A light, popping sound. The footsteps of it behind him became audible. The once faint sound had grown loud enough to mix with his own breath. The approaching presence of it from behind became more distinct. A growl, not of human origin, licked his spine. Despite his intoxicated state, the chilling sensation was unmistakable, as if it were etched into his brain. The officer wanted to scream, but he couldn't. The moment he made even the slightest noise, it seemed ready to pounce. Arriving in front of his room at last, he hastily entered the access code. He had never entered the keypad this quickly since boarding the ship. Damn it. Open up. Finally, the door opened, and he rushed into the room. As he closed the door, it vibrated as if struck by something. The impact sent the officer sprawling to the floor. He lay there frozen. Behind the door, there was no sound, as if the previous shock had been a lie. The officer could feel it. It was still outside. The phone. I need to call. With great effort, he regained his composure and thought of the emergency phone installed in his bedroom. Due to his tension, his legs didn't respond as they should, making him crawl like a cripple. Then it happened. A sound that should never have reached his ears. Beep. His head turned back towards the door like a puppet on a string. It is entering the access code. Beep, 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 beep. A cheerful alert sounded out of place as the door lock was released and the door opened slowly. The hunt had been easy. Well, could it even be called a hunt? He had merely cornered someone who was too drunk to think straight. His routine is so simple, it was easy. After observing him for 2 days, the daily life of the materials management officer was identical down to the last detail. He spent his days idling away in the materials management room and stayed up all night drinking at the bar within the ship. With a superior as pathetic as this, the team members didn't care about where he was or what he was doing. I wonder if Captain Samuel knows his subordinate is embezzling his salary. He should be thankful to me. I'm reducing the number of people wasting their salaries. Thanks to that, I'm doing well. Originally, I had planned to wait for about 3 or 4 days, but there was no need for that. I decided to attack him while he was still intoxicated. Today, just like any other day, he had wasted his time at the bar. I had already confirmed that there were no surveillance cameras from the bar to the materials management officer's room. All that remained was to enjoy the leisurely hunt. I deliberately didn't ambush him. Just occasionally showing myself briefly was enough to make him follow my lead. It was frustrating that he was slow in fleeing due to the alcohol, but other than that, everything was satisfying. After desperately running, he hid in the room. A titanium-based ultra-high-strength alloy door that even a laser weapon couldn't penetrate separated him and me. He's probably feeling safe, thinking that the door made of titanium will protect him. That's not wrong. Using my thumb, I read the fingerprints on the keypad. The materials management officer never intended this, but he was now little more than a guest who had received an invitation. The door opened very easily, and inside, there was a terrified face. A civilian with no weapons had no chance of resisting an amorph. I'll enjoy this. The materials management officer's taste was honestly mediocre. There was plenty of fat, but the strong scent of alcohol made it hard to taste anything else. Of course, I'm not a picky eater, so I ate everything except the thumb I needed for fingerprint recognition. Where is the ID card? I wondered, scanning the room. A stainless steel bed with a seemingly comfortable mattress was against the wall. There were cabinets and a desk nearby. Oh! A partially torn female poster adorned the wall. It might have been sexy, but my current state didn't register any feelings. I lost interest in the poster and approached the desk. A clutter of empty bottles and stacks of documents covered the worn-out desk. I should clean up before I head out. While sorting through the documents, an ID card slipped out. I had everything I needed. One hand held the ID card, and the other held my thumb firmly. I left the room. Should I go straight there? Now that I had everything I needed, I went to the cargo container. I approached the container in the cargo container and held my ID card up to the recognition panel. The red light on the terminal above the recognition panel turned green, and a message appeared instructing me to proceed. I pressed the recognition panel firmly with the materials management officer's thumb and the door opened with a clunk. I wonder if there's anything good inside. As I stepped into the container, a cold chill passed through my body. Inside, there were several cryogenic tubes containing various kinds of organisms. So, this gentleman was a smuggler. If there had been any problems within the ship, he could have reported them to someone. But he had been muttering to himself alone, and I never expected there was such a hidden story. I looked around the cryogenic tubes, and among them, I saw something I recognized. Amorph's egg? There were 2 amorph eggs in the cryogenic tubes. One was tightly packed and plump, while the other was empty. An empty egg. The materials management officer had been searching for something with a puzzled expression. Could this be my body that came out of the egg? It seemed strange somehow. In the game, Amorph's starting point was not a steel ship like this but an unidentified ruin. He was trying to smuggle me. Judging from what was placed in the cryogenic chamber, it seemed that the materials management officer had intended to sell Amorph's egg somewhere. Somewhere along the way, something happened, and one of the eggs hatched and escaped from the container. Perhaps shortly after escaping, my body's previous owner had died. And that's when my consciousness took over. I could easily guess why the previous owner had died. Since it had just been born, it must have lacked nutrients. Even eating cockroaches makes sense. No matter how much I liked Amorph, it wasn't easy to see a cockroach and immediately eat it with human sensibilities. Probably, it was instinctively done to survive. Seeing the traces left by the previous owner of this body somehow made me feel awkward. Even though it wasn't intentional, thanks to its struggles for survival, I could start in a relatively favorable situation. I bowed my head in front of the egg where Amorph was born. Regardless, the creature was already dead, and it wouldn't understand human gestures, but I just wanted to do it. Let's end the morning here. Human actions were over, and now it was time for Amorph-like actions. I opened the cryogenic tubes and began to consume another intact egg. I didn't spare any of the Amorph hatchlings that were inside. Amorph was hostile to all species, including its own kind. The one that hatches first eats the other eggs. Perhaps Amorph itself was the embodiment of extreme survival competition. When newly born, there were 2 advantages to consuming other hatchlings or eggs. One was that it could provide the necessary nutrients in its hatchling state, and the other was that it could quickly obtain Amorph's genetic essence. Strengthening traits like super sense through identical genetic essence is extremely helpful in the early stages. I had hoped to acquire genetic essence, but unfortunately, there was no notification of predation. Disappointed, I looked around and another cryogenic tube came into my view. Come to think of it, there's quite a bit of prey here. The owner of the cryogenic tubes inside the container was inside my stomach. Since the smuggler had been the one dealing with smuggling, there would be no one else on this ship who knew about the existence of this container. That meant there would be no one to object even if I consumed everything. I opened the cryogenic tubes and consumed the creatures inside one by one. Contrary to appearances, the materials management officer seemed to have done quite well as a smuggler, and there were many rare creatures. Thanks to that, I was able to obtain several rare genetic essences. Race, unidentified aggressive spacemorph. Status, metamorph. Objective, survive, first evolution successful. Special traits, predator senses, fusion, wings, chitinous exoskeleton, robust vitality, neurotoxin glands, fusion, enhanced exoskeleton, acidic blood, psychic organ, enhanced angular momentum, mimicry. Type, undetermined. Currently, there are 2 potential specialized types. Physical enhancement type, 8/10, psychic enhancement type, 2/3. Great. Only 2 more to go. To obtain the physical enhancement type, I only needed 2 more traits. When I consumed Karaji, I was honestly a bit disappointed because I had hoped to gain psychic power abilities, but I ended up with a useless psychic organ. But now, the materials management officer had given me such a valuable gift. Especially in a game scenario, obtaining powerful traits early on that would usually be available only in the mid to late game was a significant advantage. Among all the traits I possessed, this was the most effective one for killing the crew members. With this ability, I could be more proactive. While there was a strategy to hide and slowly choke out the crew members over an extended period, my encounter with the space dogs was approaching soon. I didn't know how dangerous they would be, so I needed to get stronger before that happened. Genetic essences, wait for me. Even if I screamed in space, there would be no one to hear it. This research ship was no different. The pitiful cries of the crew members would be buried deep in that black abyss, never to be heard again. Chapter 12. The usually quiet cargo container aboard the ship was bustling with activity, thanks to the technical team members. They were overwhelmed by the sudden increase in workload over the past few days. The order from above was to overhaul all the fighters. Hey, Scott. It's dinner time. Let's go grab some food. Just let me finish this. The blonde man called out to the black-haired man working by the fighter. Scott, as he was known, put down his wrench and got up from his spot. How much longer do we have? It might take overtime. Ugh, damn it. The 2 of them joined others on their way to the cafeteria. I still don't get it. What? Why are we tearing apart the planes as if we have a war to fight? Pincher, the blonde man who was chewing on synthetic meat that resembled an eraser, furrowed his brow. Scott, do you always have to bring up work during meals? Isn't it strange, though? Pincher, you should think about it too. Here we go again. Scott, who never tired of spinning bizarre conspiracy theories, made Pincher sigh. What's the latest one? I've heard something. They're trying to capture metallic gremlins from above. Metallic gremlins? Pincher scoffed as if it were absurd. Yeah. Do you really think we can take down metallic gremlins if we encounter them? The high-ranking capital guys may be tough, but they're not stupid. Instead of fighting, they'll probably run away. You should listen to people until the end. Apparently, metallic gremlins are already on board. They know about it above and they're determined to catch them. What? Have you noticed the strange smell in the air lately? They say it's the scent of metallic gremlins. This is unbelievable. Pincher shook his head as if it were ridiculous. It was true that there had been an unusual odor inside the ship lately. However, if the air were genuinely contaminated, the ship's AI would have reported it long ago. Pincher had never heard of any air quality issues until now. Just listen for a moment. Someone from the kitchen team said that people on board have been disappearing 1 or 2 at a time since last week. What nonsense. He had entertained the idea, but it was just as he expected. Pincher couldn't believe Scott's baseless chatter. The ship had a crew of 222 people. It was not a large number, and if 1 person disappeared per day, it would hardly be noticeable. And are the people above idiots? There's no way they just sit still when their subordinates are disappearing. As Pincher mentioned, the higher-ups might be jerks, but they're not stupid. Pincher had tried to dismiss Scott's delusions, but there was someone who interjected into their conversation. It was Cameron, who was sitting next to them. I've heard similar stories too. They said the materials management officer went missing. Really? Yeah. Thanks to that, the cargo container manager got promoted to acting head. See. Pincher, I was right. Scott was delighted to have someone else agreeing with him. On the other hand, Pincher's expression twisted as if he had bitten into something sour. Fine, let's say people are disappearing. Why are the higher-ups just sitting still? They say even the top brass knows everything, but they're hiding it to prevent the crew from panicking. Exactly, it's because of the metallic gremlins. Metallic, or whatever. Even if they're causing trouble, what does it have to do with fighter maintenance? Cameron shrugged his shoulders. I don't know about that. I've only heard that people are disappearing. Well, are they trying to maintain discipline by manipulating the crew? Ugh, you're such a nutcase. That's just like you. Scott scratched his head with a foolish expression, and Pincher clicked his tongue. After dinner, the technical team members returned to their workstations. Time passed, and before they knew it, it was nighttime. One by one, team members left for home, and the spacious cargo container, which had been bustling earlier, fell silent as if all the commotion had been a lie. Scott and Pincher were wrestling in a corner, focusing on a fighter. Scott, I'm going to grab some late-night snacks. What do you want to eat? I'm good. If there's synthetic booze, bring that. Scott was busy undoing a screw under the fighter. The surroundings were so quiet as if everyone had left for the day except for them. Scott. Yeah? As he was changing a part, someone called him. Cameron. Come here for a moment. I'm in the middle of something right now. It'll just take a moment. Scott was busy as hell, and Cameron's call was annoying. He had promised to give a piece of his mind to anyone who bothered him with something unimportant, and he reluctantly crawled out from under the fighter. In the spacious area, all he could see were fighters and toolboxes. Cameron was nowhere to be found. You call someone and then disappear? I'm right here. Come quickly. Cameron's voice popped up at the right moment, as if he were trying to inform Scott. In the maintenance bay. He was quite an irritating guy. Scott grumbled as he made his way to the maintenance bay. When he arrived at the bay, the lights were off. I stopped by here, didn't I? He cocked his head, wondering if he had been mistaken, but then he heard Cameron's voice from inside. Scott, over here. Why is it so dark in here, and what are you doing? I'm looking for something. Hurry up and help me. Scott pressed the switch in the maintenance bay, but it didn't turn on. It seemed like it had been turned off from the central control room since it was late. He reluctantly took a flashlight from his belt. The bright light illuminated the dim interior of the maintenance bay. It wasn't a pleasant atmosphere. Shelves of metal parts were stacked with tools and seemed like they could spill at any moment. On the floor, there were discarded cigarette butts and dried synthetic alcohol stains, making it look quite filthy. Moreover, there was an odor in the maintenance bay. The air was filled with various unpleasant smells, such as the metallic scent of oil clinging to tools, the smell of solder from the soldering iron, and the stench of unwashed men. In the midst of this familiar yet repulsive scent, Scott sensed something strange. What's this smell? Being someone who handled metal parts every day, he could recognize it. In the air of the maintenance bay, there was a scent reminiscent of a metallic tang, but there was something else mixed in. Where the hell is this guy? I'm over here. This way. It was strange. The voice that had been coming from the door just moments ago was now coming from inside. Following the voice, he passed through the narrow space between metal shelves. In the pitch-black space, nothing could be seen without the flashlight. He was walking, relying on the light from his hand, and nearly stumbled. What the hell? Scott had stepped on something, which turned out to be a rolling screw. After regaining his balance with difficulty, he realized something important. Even he, containering the flashlight, couldn't see properly due to the darkness. If that was the case, what was Cameron doing in the pitch blackness? The conversation they had in the cafeteria earlier came to mind. The metallic gremlins roaming the ship, and the missing crew members. With a trembling voice he didn't even realize he had, Scott called out to Cameron. See Cameron. There was no response. Just as Scott was about to turn to flee, it appeared right in front of him. Scott. Fincher, who had brought some late-night snacks, found it strange that there was no one around the fighter. Although Scott was acting a bit strange, he was a friend who always diligently performed his duties. He never left his post when there was work to be done. Scott. Fincher called Scott loudly, and his colleague's name echoed in the quiet hangar. Over here. As if answering, his voice came from somewhere in the distance. Where are you? I brought synthetic alcohol. I'm in the maintenance bay. Come over here. The maintenance bay? Why did you go there again? I'm looking for something. Help me out. Correction, Scott was good at work, but he could be quite annoying in his personal life. Fincher grumbled as he headed for the maintenance bay. Why aren't the lights on, and what are you doing? I've got something to move. Help me. Ugh, you idiot. Seriously. Fincher entered the maintenance bay, containering a flashlight. In the dimly lit area behind the shelves, Scott's flashlight could be seen. Hey, what are you doing? Huh? Scott was not there. Only the tools were left behind, abandoned. Why is this here? Fincher picked up Scott's flashlight. There was no sign of Scott anywhere in the vicinity. At that moment, a drop fell on the back of his neck. What's this? Thinking it might be a leak, he touched the back of his neck. The liquid that had fallen from above was warm and sticky. He examined the liquid on his palm with the flashlight. Blood. His palm was soaked in bright red. The liquid that had fallen from the ceiling was droplets of blood. Realizing this fact, he swallowed hard. His trembling flashlight pointed upward. And there it was. Dangling from the ceiling, containing Scott, was a creature that looked like a Galargan, a dragon from mythology. The mythical dragon was now tearing Scott apart and devouring him. The dragon reached out towards Fincher as its last memory before Scott was taken away. Since that day, no one had seen those three members of the technical team. Did I have a talent for fishing? I sat in the dim maintenance bay, chewing on a human leg. The owner of the leg had been torn off with the spine and was sprawled out. Imitation. It's quite convenient. The voice of the person whose leg I was chewing on, named Fincher, flowed from my mouth. Imitation. Among the creatures that the material management team leader had tried to smuggle, there was a creature called a red worm larva. The red worm is a gigantic worm that only lives on desert planets and possesses a highly rare ability. It can mimic the voices of other creatures. This ability evolved as a means to effectively hunt other creatures in the harsh desert environment. I devoured a red worm larva that had been stored in a container and luckily obtained its genetic essence. Thanks to that, a highly complex vocal apparatus has now taken residence inside me. The downside is that my ability is a downgrade compared to the original. Unlike the red worm, I couldn't mimic any voice I wanted. I could only mimic the voice of the last creature I had consumed. I couldn't mimic the voices of Scott or Cameron, who I had eaten before. Additionally, I could only speak in short sentences or words. If I tried to speak a little longer, growls would mix in, creating strange sounds that weren't quite human or monster. But it's still a pretty good ability. Instead of low growls, a clear adult male voice came out of my mouth, which felt strangely fascinating and awkward. I tested my voice a few times and thought about my next target. Tomorrow, I should eat someone from the cooking team. Was his name Pierre? We may not be close, but it doesn't matter. Even if they were unfamiliar, if they called out to me, they would inevitably pique my interest. Tomorrow night, I should fill up with this friend named Pierre. He won't know. He'll die because he said something unnecessary to Scott. After finishing my meal, I went out to the runway and entered the ventilation duct on the wall. Should I stop by the lab before going to the nest? As I crawled along the passage, I headed towards the laboratory. It was to see experiment subject 26, the bubble amoeba. As I got closer to the lab, I received a wave from him. Hello. The tentacles on the back of my head vibrated softly. Until now, I had thought that psychic abilities were useless. Unexpectedly, I found that through psychic abilities, I could communicate with other creatures via waves. When playing games, I always pursued efficient gameplay, so I had never paid any attention to characteristics that had minor effects like this. I never intended to have the ability to communicate with bubble amoebas. It seemed like a trait that would be more useful to bubble amoeba enthusiasts than to me. At any rate, now that it had greeted me, it was my turn to respond. I focused my mind on the back of my head. The tentacles wriggled, gathering invisible energy. Hello. I didn't even need to see experiment subject 26 to communicate now, and something new had come to light. His vocabulary seems to have expanded. As far as I knew, bubble amoebas weren't creatures known for evolution. Once they reached maturity, they mainly grew in size without any significant evolutionary changes. However, this particular one seemed to transcend the limits of its species, conveying complex and seemingly impossible information. Moreover, its communication skills were improving significantly with each encounter. They said they are doing pseudonym experiments. Is there an effect I don't know about? I wasn't sure if it was a pseudonym issue or if the creature had some special abilities. In any case, since the creature's growing intelligence didn't seem to have any adverse effects on me, I decided to stop worrying about that particular issue. Sorry. Trouble with food today. What's the trouble? Can't get any. I could sense a frustrated wave of emotion coming from the creature. I understood it perfectly well. After all, the only source of joy for the creature, which was subjected to experiments all day long, was the calorie bars I brought. But I can't get him any more calorie bars now that I've grown in size. The current security in the lab was at a level just below a nuclear reactor or a cooling room. After the research officer's death, the security team had tightened the lab's security to the maximum level. Thanks to that, the ventilation ducts above the previously secure laboratory have become risky. I had vibration detectors installed inside the laboratory, so it was clear that I would be caught if I moved carelessly. In this situation, there was nothing else I could do except have a conversation with Subject 26 from a distance. "Are you okay today? I'm struggling. It hurts." Since Karaji's death, the Psinim experiments had been at a standstill. The subordinates continued the experiments every day, but they didn't inject as much as before. Of course, that didn't mean Subject 26 was fine. Even in small amounts, Psinim was a highly toxic substance to the body. Going. Goodbye. Take care. Sigh, hang in there. It's not that I didn't want to help, but the risk was too great. Even if I had gained powerful abilities, going head to head with the crew of this ship was impossible. At least, I had to become an Ascendant to engage in guerrilla warfare. Once I became an Ascendant, I could easily wipe out the unit that received the enhanced suits. The problem is that the conditions for Ascendant evolution are strict. To evolve into an Ascendant, I had to kill and consume 10 individuals from each of the 2 intelligent species that players could control. Since there was only one suitable target on this ship, which was humans, Ascendant evolution was impossible. There are pirates, but I don't know how that will turn out. Whether I could evolve depended on which cartel the space dogs around here belonged to. If I encountered a human cartel, it would be useless. It will take several more days at least. Judging by the atmosphere on the ship, it wouldn't be long before I encountered space dogs. The engineering team members I had devoured were staying up all night repairing the fighter planes. As I was heading towards the nest, a group of people passed beneath me. They were soldiers and the crisis management officer. "I have some business to attend to, so I'll be on my way." "Yes, sir." The soldiers bid him farewell, and the crisis management officer continued walking alone towards some destination. I should probably consume the crisis management officer as well. Although he seemed like a tough opponent, I decided not to postpone it any longer. Even if I didn't consume him immediately, it wouldn't hurt to gather information about his weaknesses or daily routines in advance. I followed the crisis management officer. He was heading to the fitness training room. Inside, soldiers and crew members were diligently working on their physical fitness. What's this? Is he planning to exercise? In an instant, after changing into workout clothes, he sat down in front of an exercise machine and began his strength training routine. I watched for about 10 minutes, wondering if there would be any changes, but he was only pumping iron vigorously. Sigh. I should check on someone else. There was no need to watch Prey exercising. As I got up to leave, he finished using the machine, took something out of his pocket, and set it down on the machine's platform. A phone. It was a small phone in the shape of earphones. He held it in his hand and looked around, making sure no one was paying attention to him. After confirming that no one was bothered, he plugged the phone into his ear and resumed exercising. His actions piqued my interest, so I focused my auxiliary senses on him. Contacting. C. Nearby. His voice, which had been sporadic, gradually became clearer. Yes. The plan is proceeding as scheduled. Yes. Yes. Really? A plan? An order came from the family? Oh, no, of course not. How could I ever doubt it? For a moment, a perplexed expression crossed the crisis management officer's face, but he quickly regained his composure. In any case, it's going well. Miss Karaji has already been eliminated. The ship will arrive at C8 as planned. Yes. All of Captain Samuel's orders have been recorded. What? Yes. Yes. That's fine. Everything is in accordance with the will of the family, I mean, with Captain Jung-woo's will. I'll take responsibility. Yes. I understand. Goodbye. After hanging up the call, he once again focused on his exercise. He appeared to be a dedicated fitness enthusiast, but my suspicion of him reached its highest level. I thought he was a straightforward guy, but he's a real fox, isn't he? I knew that the crisis management officer had convinced the captain to make contact with the space dogs. However, based on the conversation I overheard, he seemed to have much more planned than just that. Whether this would benefit me or backfire on me remained to be seen. I quietly observed him from the darkness. Chapter 13. The caller seems to be from the Eugen family. I thought to myself. As far as I knew, the crisis management officer wasn't from the Eugen family. His name was Arnold Russell, and the Russell surname didn't belong to either noble capital or prime capital. It was a rather ordinary surname. Could it be an alias? I wondered. Or perhaps he was a subordinate of the person he was talking to. From the conversation, it seemed like he wished for Karaji's death. Could this be an internal matter? In the game, both the noble capital and Eugen family were ruthless when it came to power and money. The possibility of them fighting among themselves and even resorting to killing each other was quite high. In this space, eliminating Karaji Eugen would be fitting. But then again, I'm the one who killed her. From the conversation, I deduced that his goals were twofold: to kill Karaji and lure the ship to C8. I wasn't sure of the reasons, but almost unintentionally, I had helped him achieve his objectives. Whether the Eugen family fights or not, it's none of my concern. What was essential was what I would do with Arnold Russell. Cattle were raised for the sole purpose of becoming food. Useless, intelligent food needed to be excluded. He's made me wary of him. That fact alone justified his death. Having evolved into a metamorph body, fighting against soldiers wasn't a significant problem. If I were to surprise attack him, I could easily overpower the muscular man. But opportunities are scarce. Arnold had been meticulous since my hibernation, always staying in crowded places and avoiding remote areas. Should I kill him in his room like the material management officer? I considered it, but it wouldn't be easy. He slept in his reinforced suit, unlike the soldiers, making it difficult to kill him quickly. If the attempt failed, it would be quite troublesome. He could easily contact the ship's AI with the communication device provided as an option. Perhaps there's only one option in the end. If he had no weaknesses, then I would observe him until he was discovered. Time was what I needed to catch a formidable prey. I casted one more glance at him before heading to my nest. In a world where more humans are born in incubators than in their mother's wombs, it might sound absurd to seek a god in such a place. However, I somehow had the feeling that there might be a real god here. If not, there was no way such a favorable situation would be created for me. Security officer. How on earth are you handling this situation? Didn't you say you could find them? I'm sorry. From below, Samuel's voice resounded with frustration. Through the gap in the mesh fence, I could see the security chief hanging his head, clearly at a loss for what to do. I was currently eavesdropping on their conversation from above the meeting room. That damn sorry of yours. How many times have we heard it? We're scheduled to dock with the pirates in 2 days, and you still haven't resolved anything. Well, even if we increase the number of cameras and security personnel, they always manage to avoid getting caught. Damn it. Navigation officer, how many missing personnel do we have on board right now? Including the former material management officer, a total of 8 people. After the research officer's death, we have 7 missing crew members. Why can't you find them? Don't tell me you're in cahoots with that guy. And no, not at all. Currently, the ship's enigmatic murderer is attributed to the material management officer. This is because of his suspicious actions before going missing and the discovery of his container. He was an undercover smuggler who had infiltrated the ship, and he vanished after the mysterious murder incident. Unfortunately, the culprit is right here. Samuel, unaware that the culprit was right above him, sighed heavily and slumped into his chair. Let me ask one thing. Isn't the material management officer a human being? Shouldn't you search everywhere a person could go? Well, there's a shortage of cameras in some places, and even though we've installed them in crucial areas, it's like they're avoiding them like ghosts. Ugh, then what about the body? The body can't just walk around, it must be hidden somewhere. Why can't you find that? We're constantly monitoring areas that could be used to dispose of a body. I don't know how it was disposed of, but we just can't seem to find it. The security officer, who had been the center of attention for everyone in the room, took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. With his sparse hair, he looked even more forlorn, but there was no one to assist him. Tech officer, what about tracking devices? With my skills alone, it's impossible. Even if I attempt to create one, I can't guarantee its effectiveness. Damn, he's killing people who can track him. He's definitely not an ordinary human. An indolent smuggler had turned into a professional assassin. It would be a comical situation if my body were not amorph. At that moment, Crisis Management Officer Arnold raised his hand. Captain, I believe what the security officer is saying is true. Why the sudden change? I've personally checked the camera placements and all the possible hiding spots on the ship, and the security officer has done what he can. You couldn't catch the culprit, and now you're defending him? I mean it. Arnold seemed like he had deliberately brought this up, ignoring Samuel's attempts to interrupt. From a human perspective, that's what it means. If it were a human, they wouldn't be able to hide like this. What? Crisis Management Officer, are you here to spread strange rumors? Huh? I had been enjoying the situation, but the atmosphere suddenly became strange. It seemed like Arnold had decided to speak out, and even when the captain threatened him, he continued speaking. We might be dealing with an unknown entity attacking us. You see, Crisis Management Officer, the ship's AI isn't that dumb. Even though it's not the latest model, it used to manage entire battleships. If there were creatures roaming around the ship, it should have detected them long ago. I'm familiar with AI capabilities as I come from a military background. Navigation officer, but everyone knows. The material management officer's container, everything inside it was empty. Well, that's true, but then where did those creatures that were inside it go? At his words, some of the officers nodded. Samuel also seemed convinced. Oh no. The flow of people's thoughts was taking an eerie turn. What I had been most cautious about was the suspicion of extraterrestrial life creeping into people's minds. Alright. Let's assume strange space monsters are roaming around. Where would they go? We have cameras installed in the middle of every corridor, but we can't see a trace of them. There are places we haven't checked. He pointed upwards with his finger. People's attention shifted in my direction, and I quickly stepped back behind the mesh fence. The ventilation ducts. The ventilation ducts are spread throughout the ship. I don't know how big those creatures are, but if they're around 1 meter or less, that's enough room for them to move around. His statement was accurate. It seemed that Arnold wasn't the only one who had underestimated the situation. I might have underestimated him as well. It's a strategic mistake. I had planned to take my time and slowly execute my plan, but Arnold was showing more insight than expected. I should have dealt with this sooner, even if it meant taking more risks. 1 meter. Isn't that too small to kill a person? Captain, metallic gremlins can grow up to a maximum of 80 centimeters, but they can still destroy an entire battleship. It's not about their size. Right. He felt like an auxiliary system. Everyone in the room was convinced by Arnold's words. The sweating due to anxiety gradually subsided, and the irregular heartbeats were regaining their stability. We have a problem. If it's really an alien life form that killed people, what happened to the research officer's body? If that thing ate the body, we're in serious trouble. That problem will be resolved if we can capture it alive and hand it over to Noble Capital. If it's proven that it ate the research officer, they'll take it from there. Questions were flooding in from all directions, but Arnold had no trouble keeping up. He answered every question confidently, as if he had prepared for this. The questioning subsided, and finally, Samuel was the last one left. Crisis Management Officer. Yes, Captain. How many soldiers do you think you'll need? I'll select 6 soldiers from the 8th platoon and have them search the ventilation ducts. Permission granted. Please bring back good results. Thank you. After the meeting ended, I returned to my nest. I've endured for quite a while. No matter how much I loathed my body, there would come a time when we would inevitably cross paths. Unless I abandoned my nest and left, there was no way to avoid them in the ventilation ducts. Even if I were to leave the nest, I have nowhere to go. Given Arnold's personality, it was clear he would place some security measures around the ventilation shaft. This would effectively seal off the ventilation ducts. The corridors were covered in surveillance cameras, and the ventilation ducts were off limits. While we hadn't engaged in a full-blown confrontation just yet, it was only a matter of time. Now, the crucial moment for me to make a decision had arrived. Should I run away, or should I stand and fight? Since becoming aware, the once dry nest had become vibrant with life as if spring had arrived. Lying down there, I extended my small hand and gently touched the spores. Feeling the pulsation of the spores, I made up my mind. I'll fight. This ship might belong to them, but this ventilation duct system was different. This place was my domain, my home. Compared to those who tried to infiltrate this place after glancing at blueprints and maps, I possessed a different level of information. The conditions favor me. It wasn't just about the battlefield, the overall situation surrounding the ship was turning against them. The encounter with the pirates was set for 2 days from now. It was hard to imagine Samuel handing over a significant amount of credits, especially with no bodies to show. The pirates aren't offering any services, and yet they're demanding a large sum of money. Even if there are no complaints on their side, they don't know how things will turn out on Pirates' end. Those space dogs are practically icons of betrayal, and they won't just let the ship pass as it is, he knows that well. To fight the pirates effectively, they needed to maintain their full strength. Capturing me with minimal troops was impossible. Furthermore, Arnold had mentioned capturing me alive. Capture an amorph? Until the enemy is eliminated, the relentless creature that never stops until the enemy is dead is amorph. An aggressive alien creature that would bite the enemy's neck even if its limbs were cut off and only its head remained. That's me. Arnold seemed to think of me as nothing more than a wild animal roaming around on some planet, but that was far from the truth. Capturing an unknown enemy in unfavorable terrain with only a few soldiers was undoubtedly a foolish endeavor. In the space environment, especially within the ship, they'll learn just how terrifying it is to fight against a morph. I would show them everything I had, using every means at my disposal. I would teach them what it was like to fight against a morph in the vastness of space. Chapter 14. I linked my senses to the nest and spread them throughout the ship. The ship's structure and the movements of the human occupants were transmitted to me without missing a beat. The auxiliary system swiftly analyzed their movements to align with their master's intentions. If you were to imagine a spaceship as a living being wandering through space, I was akin to a parasite inhabiting the brain of a mineral-based organism. I knew what was happening on the ship as well as the ship's owner did. The auxiliary system reported to me that the captain and the officers were gathering on the bridge. Perhaps they're planning to command from the bridge. Like them, I was also devising a plan from my perch in the cooling chamber. How should I respond? First, let's consider the starting points of the enemies. There aren't many ventilation ducts large enough for an adult male to pass through. The agricultural area duct, the storage area duct, and the armory duct were the largest, with the others being just over 1 meter or even smaller. However, the likelihood of them all gathering in one place was low, as that would slow down their search efforts. On the contrary, it's more likely they'll start from 2 places. 6 individuals. Not a large number, but not a small one either. In any case, attempting to conquer the ventilation ducts with a large number of personnel would be difficult. It seemed they were opting for a small Elite Force strategy, compensating for the lack of numbers with good equipment. They'll probably be wearing intermediate-grade combat suits. The model was unknown, but it was likely to be of the same grade or lower than what Arnold was wearing. If we were to engage in a direct confrontation, I wouldn't emerge unscathed either. There's a narrowing of the passage after the intersection. Depending on the facility, there were places where ventilation needed to be well distributed, while others didn't require it. Areas like the cooling chamber had excellent air circulation systems, so the ventilation ducts were wider, but most other areas were not. Narrow passages aren't suitable for humans to navigate. Adult men would have to crouch down. It was better than crawling, but it would greatly reduce combat efficiency. Not only was it difficult to use weapons, but the uncomfortable posture also made it challenging to take full advantage of the combat suit. That's where I'll launch the ambush. The broad outlines of the plan were beginning to take shape. The details would need to be adjusted based on the enemy's armaments and movements. It seemed they were prepared as well. I could sense their movements. They had arrived at the 2 locations I had anticipated, the runway duct and the armory duct. Shall I go and greet our guests, then? After disconnecting the link with the nest, I rose from my seat. Tonight, everyone who dared to target my nest would meet their end. This is A1. A-team, commence operation. B1, report. This is Juz, B1. B-team, commencing operation. Juz. B1, check your communication status as it doesn't seem optimal. Juz, B1. Understood. The command center. On the holographic display in the center of the command center, the movements of soldiers were divided into 6 squares and broadcasted in real time. It was the result of real-time transmissions from tactical cameras attached to the soldiers' combat suits. Arnold, the crisis management officer, watched alongside the higher-ups as the soldiers entered the ventilation ducts. The entity that killed Miss Karaji, it's probably him. It was originally his duty to handle this situation. There were no changes to the plan itself, but he didn't know how the entity would act as a variable. The entity was a dangerous organism that had killed 8 people, including Miss Karaji Eugen. Others might think the materials management officer is the culprit, but he could state with certainty that the materials management officer had been killed by the monster. Monster. Eliminate variables as much as possible. Until this ship reaches Space Dog, or rather, its owner, Eugen, who is preparing a grand plan, there can't be any disruptions. If it succeeded, it would change the course of Megacorp's history. When this night is over, you'll all be dead. He stared at the holographic images with a cold gaze, and reports came in from the scene. A1. We've reached a junction. Move to the right. B1. We've also reached a junction. Moving to the right. Juzz. B3. Juzz. Communication status isn't good. We'll repair and follow. Juzz. This is the command center. B3. Join as soon as your repairs are completed. The passageways in the ship, like veins in a body, were like a maze. A and B teams had both reached junctions at the same time. The paths are complicated. Everyone, move cautiously. This is the command center. Even if it's slow, search thoroughly. A1. Understood. B1. Understood. 5 out of 6 white marks on the map received their orders and moved slowly while conducting searches. Arnold, who had been looking at the screen, felt something was amiss. The camera from B3, which was supposed to be under repair, wasn't moving. Check B3's camera. This is the command center. B3, confirm the camera status. B3. This is the command center. Repeating, confirm the camera status. It's okay. With those words, the screen moved again. At first, it shook slightly as if in disarray, but soon, like the other soldiers, it regained stability. B3. How's the reception? It's okay. As B3 had reported, there was no more noise. His mark moved toward where the other B team members were. B2. Join up with B3 coming from behind and move. B2. Understood. The B3 mark on the screen got closer to the B2 mark. Just as they were about to overlap, a scream came through the communication device. B2. What's happening? Ugh, arg. It appeared. It. Thud. B3. Lost contact with B2. Report the situation. It took B2 with him. I can't see anything on the screen. Explain in detail. It suddenly attacked, so I can't confirm. B2's camera showed nothing but darkness. There was no sound, as if the communication device had been damaged. A sense of unease spread through the command center like a contagion. The captain and officers were buzzing with questions about what was happening. The communication officer continued to try to contact B2. While everyone was in confusion, Arnold stared at the black screen. Did it end this quickly? Soldiers wearing intermediate-level reinforced suits couldn't respond at all. Arnold had considered the threat to be somewhat like a dangerous wild animal until now, but he was completely mistaken. The enemy was a much more agile killer than he had imagined. Having recalibrated the creature's abilities, Arnold gave instructions to the communication officer. Relay this to everyone. If you see anything move even a little, open fire immediately. Yes, officer. The communication officer relayed Arnold's orders, and tense responses from the soldiers could be heard over the communication device. Team A was conducting a search for the monster, while B1 and B3 from Team B were chasing after the missing B2. Although the screen showed their diligent movements, there was no sign of B2. They might end up divided and conquered. In the end, Arnold decided to abandon B2. The communication officer conveyed Arnold's message to Team B. This is the command center. B3, halt the search for B2 and join up with B1. Understood. B1, once B3 joins you, resume the search for B2. B1. Understood. B3's marker moved toward B1. The distance between the two marks on the screen gradually decreased. Just when they were about to see each other, a message came through the radio from B1. B1. I hear something. This is the command center. What exactly is the sound? B1. I'm not sure, but someone is getting closer. It's at a junction, so I can't confirm exactly. B3. Join B1 as quickly as possible. Repeat, join as quickly as possible. Understood. The situation grew tense. The silence in the command center was broken by B1's voice. B1. The source of the sound is B3. Phew. Someone let out a sigh of relief. Even Arnold, who had been keeping his eyes wide open to avoid missing any enemy movements, was relieved. Phew. This is the command center. B1, report once you've joined up with B3. B1. B3 was taken by the enemy. What? B1's report shocked everyone in the command center. Even Arnold, who had always remained calm, found it difficult to maintain his composure as the unexpected situation continued. He pushed the communication officer aside and put on a headset. Officer here. Explain the situation in detail. I couldn't confirm it because it happened so quickly. Damn it. It's right in front of you, and you couldn't see it. I apologize. 2 soldiers had already disappeared. Yet, B1 and B3 claimed they didn't see anything on the video. Unless the creature deliberately avoided being captured on camera, it was impossible. Wait a minute. Arnold suddenly had a terrifying assumption. He put the headset back on with a stern expression. Officer here. B1, state your location immediately. What? I repeat. B1, state your name immediately. There was no response from B1. The command center froze as they realized what Arnold was trying to confirm. Shit, I got caught, huh? Just. B1's communication channel remained disconnected. A black hand appeared in front of the camera, and then the screen went black. This is A1. What the hell is happening? This is A1. Command center, please respond. The bewildered voice of A1's officer filled the command center, but Arnold couldn't say anything. For now, the B team is finished. I crushed the signal device attached to B1's reinforced suit under my foot. 3 headless bodies lay beside me. Originally, the plan was to engage them in the narrow corridor behind the junction. While I was rushing ahead to prepare for the ambush, an idea occurred to me. Using the psychic device. I got the hint from my conversation with the bubble amoeba. If I could communicate with the creature using the special waves generated by the psychic device, could I disrupt wireless communication devices that operated on frequencies? It seemed to work quite well. Due to the waves I emitted, B3, who was at the rear, experienced interference in his equipment. He had no choice but to stay behind and fix it, becoming an easy prey as a result. After that, it was easy. Even when his head was pulled out by my combat arm, B3 didn't twitch a finger. It was thanks to my newly acquired fusion ability called the neurotoxin gland. When you have the neurotoxin gland, everything in your body, including nails, teeth, and bodily fluids, turns extremely toxic. When affected by this toxin, you'd experience shock or paralysis of your muscles, rendering you incapable of any action. It seemed like a powerful debuff ability, but in the game, it was considered a rare attribute. Since there were many creatures with transcendent physical abilities, it went unnoticed. But not here. Unless you were a specially modified human, it was impossible to block the neurotoxin. If you were alone and exposed to it, you might as well consider yourself dead. After that, it was a breeze. I approached the other team members pretending to be B3, using my mimicry ability. While everyone was on high alert, they wouldn't have suspected a friendly approach. Their lack of imagination allowed me to fill my belly with ease. Next is Team A, I suppose. I tucked B1's head under my arm and headed out. When the cerebral cortex burst open in my mouth like fresh juice, my body filled with energy. With 4 combat arms, I easily moved through the narrow corridor. While crawling, the auxiliary device under my chin constantly monitored Team A's movements. Whether they received orders from above or not, they were moving slowly and carefully, investigating every speck of dust on the alloy. They're in a completely defensive posture. Team B had no idea about me, but that wasn't the case on the other side. They knew that I could mimic human voices, so it was only natural. Now, should I try using the information to my advantage? Many say that knowledge is power, but is it really? Sometimes, knowing too much can be a burden. I hid my body not far from the junction. Soon, the enemy would pass through here. Then, darkness settled in the steel corridor. The light emanating from the helmet of the lead soldier illuminated the junction clearly. A1. We have reached a junction. We will proceed to the right. They had no idea that I was hiding nearby. If they didn't know, I had to inform them. I shouted loudly in B1's voice. Over here. Help me. It's the enemy. Open fire. As expected, A1 immediately issued the order to fire. 3 team members began firing their laser guns in my direction. While they were pouring firepower into the spot where I had been, I slipped away into another corridor. By going this way, I could circle around behind them. I used all 6 of my limbs to move quickly. Ceasefire. This is the command center. Confirm the enemy's status. A1. Understood. Unaware that I had already escaped, A1 walked forward. The other soldiers were focused solely on his back, fearing that he might still be in danger. I attacked A3, who was neglecting rear security. UGHH. Behind. There's an enemy behind us. Ceasefire. Our comrade is captured. Damn it. Shoot him now. The air ducts were filled with A3's cries of pain as I held him, the terror-stricken shouts of his teammates, and Arnold's screams from the command center. I had no intention of staying in such a noisy place for long, so I incapacitated A3 and withdrew. A1. Open fire immediately. That's an order. Opening fire. Opening fire. The enemies fired lasers at me belatedly. The corridor was filled with pure energy beams. Even though I was agile, I couldn't avoid all of them, so I took a few hits. It went beyond just hurting, I was in severe pain. Nevertheless, I gritted my teeth and moved away from the spot. A2. Reporting to the command center. We have a casualty. No retreat allowed. We must capture him at all costs. Darn it, squad leader, what should we do? Damn it, treat A3 and then pursue him. Their voices echoed in the darkness as I hid in the shadows. I didn't know how good their medical kits were, but detoxifying my neurotoxin wouldn't be easy. During the brief maintenance time that the enemies took, I checked my own condition. Thanks to the chitinous exoskeleton, there aren't any major injuries. But it hurts like hell. The trained soldiers managed to hit me in the chest and head due to the enhanced targeting of their powered suits. It's all because of the suit's calibration. The calibration of the powered suit's targeting had turned out to be a double-edged sword. Unlike regular animals, which would have been killed by the previous attack, I was an amorph, and my forehead and chest, protected by an exoskeleton reinforced with chitin, were as sturdy as the titanium alloy used in spaceship hulls. Furthermore, my current chitinous exoskeleton was even more resilient. Even though the enemies didn't realize it, I'd barely suffered any damage despite their trained shots. If they had targeted my tail or limbs, it would have been a different story. 1 down. 2 prey remained. Since I didn't expect to be ambushed here again, I needed to use a different approach. Come to think of it, there was a suitable place to butcher them, a location I had considered when planning. It was the narrow corridor. Let's lure them in. I extended my claws and inflicted minor wounds on my arm, causing black blood to drip onto the floor. Each drop of blood created a puff of smoke rising from the corridor's floor. This was spider silk, a trap set by a spider to catch prey. The prey, who had mindlessly followed me, would finally realize what had happened. They would understand that they had fallen into a web of doom. Chapter 15. Darn it. Wake up. Ugh. Shock detected in A3. Administer the antidote. I'll administer it. A2 operated the terminal on A3's wrist. As he did, a sound of air escaping from A3's reinforced suit accompanied the injection of the antidote into the wearer. A3, who had been frothing at the mouth moments ago, showed some signs of improvement, but it was merely first aid. The antidote within the reinforced suit provided minimal life support and pain relief but lacked detoxification capabilities. They needed to complete the mission as quickly as possible and get A3 to a medical facility. A1 and A2, sharing the same thought, exchanged glances. A1. The antidote has been administered to A3. Proceeding with the mission. This is the command center. Permission granted. Having reported to the command center above, they left A3 lying on the ground. 3 comrades had died because of that damn monster. They couldn't properly rest until they captured it and tore it apart. A1. I request permission to administer enhancement serum for more efficient suppression. Permission granted. As soon as permission was granted, A1 and A2 pressed the buttons on their terminals. The enhancement serum was injected and veins popped on their faces and necks. One of the advantages of reinforced suits was the special solution they contained, which enhanced a soldier's combat abilities. Lower-tier reinforced suits carried painkillers, while mid-tier ones had 2 chemical solutions. These solutions included a treatment serum that healed injuries and boosted natural recovery and an enhancement serum that temporarily enhanced muscles and senses. When administered to an ordinary person, the enhancement serum greatly improved physical abilities to the extent that they could punch holes in concrete walls with their fists. As for soldiers wearing reinforced suits, the effects were even more significant. However, there was a lethal drawback: permanent muscle loss and up to a week of debilitation once the enhancement effects wore off. Nevertheless, those who had already gone mad had no concerns about such side effects. That damn creature, I'll kill it. I'm going first. The orders they received were to capture the enigmatic hazardous creature alive. However, the heads of the two soldiers who had lost their comrades were filled with thoughts of tearing it apart with their bare hands. With determination, they walked along the corridor. Along the path where the creature had disappeared, they noticed unusual traces. There were sporadic marks of something having melted the floor. It seems like the creature got injured as well. Insane. Acidic blood. I have no idea what kind of monster this is. They realized that the enemy wasn't your typical savage being. Tensions rose as they continued to follow the melted marks. Before long, they understood that they needed to mentally prepare themselves. The narrow, low corridor required an adult male to stoop to move through. It posed an obstacle that they couldn't avoid. It's narrow. What should we do? We're going in. They had already administered the enhancement serum. There was no retreat for them. The two soldiers squeezed their bodies into the narrow corridor. They're coming. My auxiliary sensors detected subtle vibrations in the air, much like prey caught in a spider's web. An intruder had entered my domain. Their heartbeats were rougher and faster than those of regular individuals. They exhaled a harsh breath, similar to a beast, which dispersed into the air. They've used enhancement serum. It seemed like they were quite enraged if they were wearing mid-tier reinforced suits, known for severe side effects. It didn't matter to me. Enhanced physical abilities from the serum wouldn't be of much use in this damp, maze-like space. Let's get started. Having successfully lured the prey, it was time to set the trap. I deliberately widened my wounds, allowing blood to pour onto the floor. As the acidic blood pooled, toxic gas billowed up. Beyond the gas-filled corridor, I could see the shape of the hallway. Not content with merely melting the ventilation duct, the corrosive blood had eaten through the corridor ceiling. This should do. I patched up my wounds and patiently waited in the darkness until they arrived. Before long, they revealed themselves. They wore special helmets attached to their reinforced suits. Thanks to the helmet's gas masks, they moved effortlessly through the gas-filled corridor. They seemed momentarily startled by the sudden gas, but, behaving like experienced soldiers, they kept their composure. Cautiously walking while staying on high alert, they eventually found the source of the gas. A1 concentrated on communication while another soldier examined the corridor beneath the floor. Everyone was preoccupied, making this the perfect opportunity. Hunched in a corner of the corridor, I sprang forward like a leopard targeting a gazelle. With my 6 legs, the cramped space posed no hindrance. A2, with heightened senses thanks to the enhancement serum, reacted instantly. His gun barrel swiftly aimed at my head, emitting a burst of light. An energy projectile whizzed past just inches behind my head. A2 appeared bewildered at missing the shot. I couldn't blame him. Why did I choose this cramped and uncomfortable place for a battleground? The tight quarters had subtly altered the angle of his aim. Conversely, my dark chitinous exoskeleton performed admirably as camouflage in this lightless space. It disadvantaged the enemy while favoring my allies. That was precisely why I had chosen this place as my hunting ground. Ugh! He adjusted his posture and aimed at me again. His reaction was swift, but I had already closed the gap. Before he could pull the trigger, both my hands were around his head. Perhaps he sensed his impending demise. Through the transparent visor of his helmet, I saw his dilated pupils. The reinforced suit, designed to grant them superhuman strength, couldn't provide protection to delicate and flexible areas like the throat. When I applied pressure to A2's throat, it snapped as easily as a twig. You arc. A1, a step too late in realizing my presence, screamed and aimed his laser weapon at me. I used the partially limp A2 as a shield to protect myself. The scent of searing flesh, born from the burning meat, gently tickled my auxiliary sensors. Amidst the tension of battle and my hunger, I hurled A2's charred remains at A1. Damn it all. A1, having lost his composure, wildly fired his laser rifle. Given the close range, some shots found their mark on my body. Perhaps due to the substantial pain or for some other reason, I felt a surge of primal instincts. The sharp blade at the tip of my tail shot out, narrowly missing A1's shoulder as he adeptly parried it with his enhanced left arm. My tail missed its target and collided with the corridor, after which A1 leapt at me, delivering a powerful punch. I considered using my combat arm to block it, but A1 was clad in a reinforced suit, and he had also been injected with an enhancer that significantly boosted his combat prowess. There was no need for unnecessary risks. I evaded A1's punch by taking a few steps back. His solid alloy fist crumpled a bit upon striking the corridor. Stronger than I expected. It hadn't been this intense in the game. Continuing this fight might result in unnecessary losses. It's time to change strategy. I swung my tail widely to force A1 to step back and then made my escape. Laser shots from behind me missed their mark entirely. Only one enemy left. I had already exhausted most of my tricks. Deception wouldn't be effective against A1 now. In the distance, I could hear A1's enraged cries. Given my venomous state, I doubted a surprise attack would be very effective. Oh. Is there still one thing left? As I pondered, a brilliant idea suddenly crossed my mind. I could sense two life forms currently. A1, who was rampaging, and A3, who was paralyzed. While A1 was distracted, firing lasers in the wrong direction, I stealthily crept toward A3's location. Exiting the narrow corridor, I noticed that the ceiling had risen significantly. Standing on two legs, I spotted A3 lying in the middle of the corridor. A3, who had received emergency treatment, had narrowly avoided death but didn't look to be in great shape. He couldn't speak due to lingering paralysis, only emitting feeble groans. I approached from a direction that wouldn't trigger his camera. When I was about a few meters away from him, he sensed my presence. The fearful groans of agony were easily discernible. Although he tried desperately to communicate the situation to the command center, but his arms and legs were already paralyzed. He writhed in a futile attempt to convey his distress. I approached the terrified creature and gently nudged his back with my foot. Grrrr. I could see something fluffy standing upright on A3's nape. His hair was already soaked with sweat. Like a frightened animal, he exhaled ragged breaths, trembling without any sense of direction. Coincidentally, A3 had been attacked exclusively from behind until now. Perhaps that's why he was more terrified, because he didn't know what I looked like. After all, the greatest fear often comes from the unknown. Doesn't really matter since he's going to die anyway. I used my 4 combat arms to pierce his side. This area was unprotected, and my hands easily penetrated his body. As I pressed my claws into his back, I felt him release his final breath. Having swiftly killed A3, I exerted force on the hand that had been inserted into his side. I grasped his elongated intestines with my 4 hands and pulled them out roughly. I quickly shoved his entrails into my mouth without savoring the taste and hastily chewed, then returned my hands into his body. Time was running out. To use A3's body as a shield, I needed to empty his insides. I continued to extract his organs. This should do. When A3's weight had decreased by about half, I flipped his body over. The camera lens on his body emitted a red light as if greeting me. I proceeded to smash the cameras and communication devices attached to A3's body. With this, they would realize that A3 had been attacked from the other side. I thrust my head into A3's side. Sticky blood and the lingering warmth of the corpse enveloped my entire being. Inside the shell of A3, now just a husk, there were no organs for sustaining life. Instead, it was filled with a predator from the outside. I coiled my tail, which hadn't managed to enter, tightly around the lower part of the corpse to conceal it. A moment later, I heard A1's footsteps from outside. A3. Are you okay? Answer me. Dead men tell no tales. A3, already a mummy, remained silent. I could sense him reaching out his hand to check his pulse. He was completely off guard. He probably didn't even consider whether A3 was dead or what might be lurking behind that skin. As he got close enough, my arm pierced through A3's abdomen and jutted out. A1, who had been bending down to check the pulse, just allowed my attack to happen. My sharp talons slashed across his thigh. Ugh! He belatedly tried to stand, but it was futile. The paralyzing neurotoxin had already advanced upwards, rendering his lower body completely useless. His body crumpled to the floor like a felled tree. He struggled to get up with all his might, but it had been a long time since even his central nervous system had been rendered useless. Like Troy collapsing under the Trojan horse, A1 was perishing from within the fortress. A1's body trembled. Was it because of the shock or the impending doom? Regardless, his future was predetermined. There was only one thing he could do, like prey ensnared in a spider's web, wait for death. After tearing myself out of the corpse, I licked the blood off my hands. The primitive sweetness was like condensed sugar syrup penetrating my mind. I would have enjoyed it more, but there was still work to be done. I approached the trembling A1. I grabbed his shoulders near his ribs with my lower pair of arms and removed his helmet with my upper pair of arms. His exposed face looked younger than I had anticipated. However, the scars around his eyes revealed that he was a warrior who had emerged from many battlefields. Even such a valiant hero seemed to fear death. His face was a mess of tears and snot. The two arms above him enveloped his head. Sensing the impending events, he tightly shut his eyes. I increased the pressure in my hands, fulfilling his expectations. With a sound like trees being uprooted in a storm, his neck was slowly torn apart. There was no scream. The neurotoxin allowed him neither screams nor any movement. His pupils shook violently as he endured the pain of his throat being slowly torn apart while still alive. By the time the white bones of his neck were exposed, A1 was dead. I held his head, his tongue hanging out, and gazed into the camera. There was no sound from the communication device, but I could tell. They were afraid. This should be enough to convey my message. With that judgment, I crushed the camera. The spider's web was not only spread throughout the ventilation shaft. Next, it would be their turn. Chapter 16. How will the enemy emerge? This is not the end. The ones who sent the soldiers and more soldiers are still left. So, what should I do? With 6 dead, there are a total of 90 soldiers and officers on the other side. It's highly likely that they will go all out after receiving my warning. I know that they're short on reinforced suits, but the real problem is the weapons. If the enemy comes armed with more than laser equipment, say, plasma weapons, my chances of winning become slim. The plasma class is unstoppable. With enhanced physical types, I can withstand it only twice at most, and before that, there's nothing I can do to stop it. One hit would be instant death. It's inevitable because plasma weapons are developed for fleet battles. They're such high-powered weapons that they're used to destroy warships or tanks, so one shot packs quite a punch. However, the majority of plasma weapons are so heavy that they can't be carried alone. There are lightweight versions, but those are prohibitively expensive as if their prices were through the roof. All I can expect to find here is a plasma launcher. The plasma launcher is a heavy weapon supplied by the division in Megacorp. Honestly, given the dismal supply situation, it doesn't seem like there would be any plasma launchers either, but you never know. It'll be difficult to deceive them any further. Since a significant portion of the cards I hold has been exposed, I couldn't deceive the enemy in the same way. I might be able to handle a few of the less experienced ones, but it would be difficult to deceive and surpass the 90-strong force. Arnold won't stop until he confirms my death. Unlike the amateurish aspects displayed by the Captain Samuel, Arnold is a meticulous soldier. Moreover, he's a soldier who conspires. I don't know what his plan is, but he will undoubtedly try to kill me before arriving at C8. In that case, I'll go for their heads here. Now is the time for a speed battle. Let's tidy up the information about me and strike the headquarters before they organize their front line. Just then, I ran to the bridge. On the way, I saw soldiers jumping to the opposite side through a ventilation hole in the floor. Their destination was the agricultural area that A1 had reported. It seemed like the enemy thought I was preparing a siege, but that was a completely wrong judgment. While the enemy was searching in the wrong place, I was already here, right in front of them. Beyond the iron grill of the ventilation hole in the wall, I could see a white floor. It was the command center, the cleanest space after the laboratory on the spaceship. Compared to the marble-like floor, the wall displayed a dark cosmic space. It was showing the external scenery in real time through cameras attached to the ship's exterior. The people in the command center seemed oblivious to the beautiful spectacle of countless stars dancing and were simply making a lot of noise. Crisis Management Officer. Where did that insane monster come from? No, more importantly, what on earth is its identity? You couldn't see it from here, but you could easily guess that the Samuel was in a state of panic just by listening to his voice. Not far from there, Arnold's voice could be heard. I don't know. When I checked the list of materials management officers, there was an organism that wasn't registered in the database. Maybe it's that thing. Such irresponsible remarks. I lent you a officer's reinforced suit, and you got nothing in return. So, that was a officer's suit. Reinforced suits are a lifeline in space, so they should have spent a bit more. If there had been a few more intermediate reinforced suits, or even just advanced ones, I wouldn't have been able to hunt them easily. Trying to save money will cost Samuel his own life. It seemed that he had similar thoughts to mine as anger crept into Arnold's voice. If we had slightly better equipment, this disaster wouldn't have happened, Captain. What? And the statement that we got nothing is incorrect. We obtained information that the enemy is a highly intelligent, dangerous organism that can mimic human voices. Is that all you have to say? In the battlefield, gathering information is more important than anything else. We've obtained the minimum information about the enemy, and we need to act based on that. Ugh. There was a hint of irritation, but Arnold's voice remained steady. Samuel had no words to reply and simply clicked his tongue. So, is there a solution? We've already sent the soldiers, but there's something else we need to request. What is it? Please authorize the use of the plasma launcher in the armory. What? I had my doubts, but it seemed they actually had a plasma launcher. It didn't seem like it had been supplied to the entire unit judging by the nuance, but still. The plasma launcher was like a magical wand that could solve most problems, but the officers didn't seem to approve. Are you insane? Weren't we supposed to use that weapon for fighting pirates? This is a spaceship. Even if it's been modified into a research vessel, using a plasma launcher on board. If you want to commit suicide, go outside into space by yourself. Enough. As the navigation officer and the technology officer continued to squabble, Arnold shouted at them. They hesitated for a moment and then confronted Arnold again. Are you raising your voice at us? We cannot approve of using a plasma launcher on board. Arnold had excelled in everything he had done until now, but this operation had been a huge failure. As a result, his charisma had fallen irrecoverably. It was a reaction befitting a Megacorp member who always placed results above all else. It's about time to leave. The superiors were in a state of turmoil and the subordinates were in a quandary about whether to stop them or let them go. This was the perfect moment for the prey to be choked in the enemy's confusion. Amorph's delicate auxiliary organs began their search. The target was any movement within the command center. The tentacles at the tip of my chin twitched and felt the air. Then, a wave of information, like a swirling galaxy, poured in. The electromagnetic waves and heat emitted by computers and electronic devices, the faint mechanical noises made as precision components moved every time the ship's AI operated, human breath, the sound of clothes brushing against each other, the scent of sweat, the tremors of muscles, the beating of hearts, the sound of blood flowing through veins. It was a world that humans could never perceive. I glimpsed into the dimension of super sense perception and searched for my target. Arnold was the top priority target, but he was too far from my location. He had deliberately chosen a distant position because he knew I would be using the ventilation ducts. The one closest to me is. The information detected was that of a familiar individual I had seen several times before. A man with a somewhat timid appearance with half of his head exposed, named Wei. He had become the temporary research officer in place of Karaji Eugen and still tortured experiment subject 26 every day. I'll go for him. I had always planned to kill him someday. Fortunately, a good opportunity had presented itself, so there was no need to hesitate. I smashed the iron grill of the ventilation duct with my combat arm. The thin alloy grill shattered into pieces by my reinforced arm, which had become fluid. The AI would send a warning signal, but humans had to respond. Everything would be over before they saw the AI report. I gave strength to my legs enhanced by the enhanced reflexes trait. TL/N enhanced reflexes was previously translated as enhanced angular momentum. We'll be using enhanced reflexes moving forward. My body leapt high as if stepping on a spring. While my body remained suspended in the air, Arnold was the first to react to the sound of the broken grill. His gaze turned towards the damaged ventilation duct. His eyes widened. He had recognized the attack. Soon, he would let out a scream of alarm, but by then, one person would already be dead because I was already above Wei's head. It was only after my body covered him that Wei reacted. He struggled as I perched on his shoulders, and I bit into his face. In an instant, his face was covered in blood due to my razor-sharp teeth. His facial skin tore apart, and his eyes and nose were damaged to the point of dysfunction. Wei, who had his face ripped apart by my sharp teeth, let out a scream of pain. Seeing his pitiful state, the other officers who had been watching in a daze turned pale. Ugh, it's a monster. Wei, who collapsed to the floor, covered in blood, and I moved to another officer who was nearby. The vivid Megacorp uniform was stained with blood and flesh. Ah! Please, spare me. Calm. Communications officer. Inform the ship. I couldn't leave them like that. I stopped attacking the officer and turned to the communications officer. Eek. Unlike the soldiers who had entered through the ventilation duct, he seemed to lack much combat experience. Seeing my bloodied appearance, he froze and couldn't move. I had no intention of showing mercy, so I lunged at him. Ark. I used my strength to topple him, and then I finished him off with my tail. Now, my tail, which had grown to the size of a dagger, pierced his eyes and penetrated his brain. As I retrieved my tail, which had created holes in his head, an energy projectile came flying from somewhere and struck my back. When I turned around, it was Arnold. He held a small laser pistol in his hand. The officer's pistol, I see. I thought he would run away, but it was unexpected. I shook my tail vigorously to flick off the splattered blood. Maybe he was just putting up a facade of trust, but he didn't back down and fired his pistol again. I lightly twisted my body to avoid it and approached him. He's not even wearing enhanced armor? Like the other officers, his attire was a uniform. Perhaps because he was a soldier, the color was red instead of white, but there was no defensive functionality. In other words, if I swung my arm, his upper and lower body would separate, and he would sprawl on the floor. Gras. Having finished off Wei, who was groaning next to him with my tail, I prepared to leap at Arnold. As I prepared to kick off with my legs, the auxiliary organ vibrated heavily. My body floated in the air. Arnold fired his pistol belatedly, but all the shots missed. My tail pierced Arnold's abdomen. He took out a plasma pistol from his holster. I tried to dodge, but my tail was stuck in his body, so I couldn't avoid it. The plasma round destroyed my head. I died. It was like scenes passing by at an incredible speed, as if I had sped up the video dozens of times. It was an effect of precognition through the predator sense. A plasma pistol. Arnold had an unexpected weapon in his possession. The plasma pistol was one of the few plasma weapons that had successfully been lightweight. It had excellent killing power and was as lightweight as a handgun, making it an excellent weapon. However, it had one downside. Its price was astronomically high. One of those pistols cost as much as 3 of these ships. Unless you had the wealth of a noble capital or a prime capital, you wouldn't even dream of owning such equipment. Darn it, it seems like he's connected to the Eugen family. That money-eating glutton, the plasma pistol, could kill me. A shot to the head or chest would result in instant death, and even a graze would be at least a severe injury. So, I had to move cautiously. As my movements became more cautious, Arnold frowned. As expected, you figured it out. From his pocket, he pulled out a silver, thin, gun-shaped plasma pistol. Samuel, who had been hiding in the corner, along with the other officers, let out gasps of amazement. A plasma pistol. That expensive weapon. Arnold's tense expression from earlier turned into a relaxed smile as if the tension had all been an act. I don't know your identity, but I have a feeling. GRRR. A monster with various abilities. You resemble my master, Eugen. As he spoke, his gun was aimed at me. With my auxiliary organ extremely activated, I had read his body in advance, and I quickly leapt away. In my previous position, a green energy projectile exploded. The alloy plates, which were tough enough to withstand space debris, were shattered in a single shot. I will eliminate variables before my master arrives. Dodging his weapon, I took cover behind a computer. Our location was the bridge. It was an important facility, so he probably couldn't fire indiscriminately, but I couldn't be sure how long we could hold out. Time was not on my side. Since everyone on board the ship was my enemy, the longer I delayed, the more disadvantageous it became for me. The situation isn't good. This was the biggest crisis I had faced since my berth in the cargo container. There were various factors threatening my survival, but there had never been a time when death was so close. No. To be more precise, it was from the moment I possessed a morph's body. I've faced greater dangers than this. In space survival, I had experienced the worst situations as if they were nothing. Did I give up? Did I lose? Not at all. The one who always stood at the end was me, the amorph. You think you can kill me? Arnold was mistaken. Regardless of whether it was his master or anyone else, the one who would greet them would not be someone like Arnold but rather me.